Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
It was a strange letter, Liam, brought by a fast delivery courier. There was no return address on the plastic bag sealed with yellow tape. It was therefore impossible to establish where it had been sent from. Liam, puzzled as to who could have sent him this letter, whirled the package in his hands and asked the courier, "Where is this from?" The envelope usually has the sender's address on it. He shrugged. Liam turned the envelope over and over, but found nothing. Nothing is written here, so the sender decided not to give his address. That happens too. You can sign here on the delivery note. The guy asked annoyingly, "I have 3 more addresses to deliver to." Yes, of course. Liam took the clipboard with the attached sheet and a pen given by the courier and signed, "Have a good day." The delivery man jumped into the car and was off. Liam opened the gate and walked back into the yard. He went into the house and opened the package with a knife. Inside there was only one sheet of paper with the text printed on the printer. It said the following: "Liam, when you get this letter, I will be far away from here, but you should know that I am alive. I have chosen my own path, and I will follow it to the end. I'll probably never see you again. Know that I've always loved you. But after everything that's happened, we can never be together again. You know that better than anyone, don't you? Don't try to look for me. I wrote that letter so you wouldn't think I was responsible for my death, because there was no death. Goodbye, Liam. Try to be happy." And at the end, a handwritten signature. "Molly, who used to be your wife." Liam sank heavily onto the stool and covered his eyes. The blood throbbed in his temples, his head was noisy, his legs felt heavy and wouldn't obey him. What is this? What's going on? Some kind of stupid prank. But who in heaven's name would make a joke like that? Liam's thoughts were running wild like raging horses. After sitting like that for about 10 minutes, he got up, walked around the room, reread the letter again and again. He clutched his head, ran out into the yard, rushed into the barn, pulled out a huge stump, and began to chop logs from an old pear tree that had recently been cut down for firewood. At the sound of the axe, the old mother came out of her half of the house, looked at it, shook her head, and sat down on a bench nearby. Liam fought with the wood for a long time, until all the anger at the idiot joker came out. With each swing of the axe, he saw again and again the horrible picture he had seen in this very room, where he had read today a letter typed by someone who did not know and had not experienced what he had experienced in the last 6 months. At last, with a swing of his axe into the stump, he staggered away. His mother, still sitting inconspicuously on the bench, said timidly, "Liam, you should eat. I've made soup." "I don't want it." He mumbled and went back to his room. The old woman sighed heavily and followed him. She felt pity for her only son. When she entered the house, she sank down on the floor in front of the images and began to mutter prayers. Liam got dressed, left the house, started his Mazda, and drove away from the city. Not far away, where the Central City Cemetery sprawled beyond the city limits after wide fields, woods, and groves, Liam drove unmistakably along the winding cemetery paths, stopped the car near 2 young fishes, and squelching through the mud with rubber boots, reached a fresh grave without a fence and without a monument, with a simple wooden cross. Looking with pain and longing at the plaque screwed to the crossbar, he said bitterly, "Hello, Molly. Here I am to see you again. It was raining this morning. I trimmed your irises for winter." After a little silence, a little Liam added in a questioning tone, "You didn't write that silly letter, did you?" "I know I didn't." You can't write from there." He sighed heavily and, ignoring the dirt, knelt down in front of the grave, bent down, hiding his face in his hands, swaying from side to side and moaning sadly. "Molly, Molly, my love, why did you do that?" "How can I be alone now, Molly?" In the administrative building of the city's ritual bureau at the main entrance to the cemetery, it was a normal workday. The girls in the accounting department were sitting at their computers. The administrator, Kelly, was checking something in thick journals. The receptionists were placing orders. The cleaning lady, Wendy, having washed all the offices and a small corridor clean from the morning, was dusting everywhere. Having coped with this task, she watered the flowers and went into the pantry, boiled a kettle, brewed herself a sachet, and wanted to relax from her work. "Wendy." From the door came the aged voice of the cemetery keeper, Grandpa Christopher. "Wendy," repeated Christopher, approaching the table. "I hear you. I hear you. What are you yelling about?" The old janitor, and once a bookkeeper, was a longtime friend of the decrepit watchman. They had seen a lot of things, working side by side on the cemetery land, so to speak. They buried both reds and whites, believers and atheists, old and young beggars and rich, and all other God's creatures, which only walk under the sun until their hour comes. Both buried their spouses, Wendy the husband, Christopher the wife. They'd become friends over the years. Only one thing they couldn't accept, being both old school. And that's what their conversation was about today. "You know what, Wendy? The husband of that young suicide from the grave in Sector 8 still walks around every day, still walks around." "So what?" Wendy snorted. "He's not the first, and he won't be the last. He'll walk and stop. They say their baby died," Christopher said pitifully, pouring boiling water into his mug. "And this is not the first time." Wendy sighed. "I buried 2 of them in the war, and my father, older brother, and 2 younger twins. And now the people are so frail, they're just as likely to jump the gun as anything else." "Huh." She spat over her left shoulder. "Fuck them." "Yes," the watchman agreed. "People are going crazy. You know what, Wendy?" He suddenly perked up. "What have I noticed?" "Well," Wendy replied, blowing hard on her tea. "A lady came to the grave in the week. I don't remember the date, too." Wendy stretched out indifferently, which must have meant something. "Well, what was it?" "She came," Christopher reported at length. "By dusk, she was already standing for a long time, looking, and I was picking, trimming bushes. But she couldn't stand it. Wendy was almost angry. And what? And then she turned around," solemnly concluded the watchman, paying no attention to the discontent of the interlocutor. "Here I'll tell you straight and dumbfounded." "From what is it?" Wendy asked tiredly. Like 2 drops of water, solemnly raised his voice the old man. "Here's a cross for you, just like the dead woman. How about a sister?" Wendy yawned. "It happens." No, the watchman objected vehemently. The dead woman herself came to the place of her burial. Suicides always walk like that. They can't lie still in the damp earth. "Yes, that's right. I tell you, the earth doesn't accept them." "Well, it's true," Wendy agreed, getting a little lively. It was not for nothing that they were not buried in the pogost under the Tsar. Only outside the fence, outside the line. "There," raising his finger to the top, the watchman proclaimed. "That's the way it is. And now they bury anyone right in the cemetery." He sighed. "No idea." That was the end of the old men's conversation. Only one thing they didn't know was that most of their conversation was heard by the suicide's husband. When Liam finally stood up from the grave, he remembered that he had to pick up some funeral papers at the cemetery administration building. It had been a month since the funeral, and he still couldn't find the strength to go and sign the papers, to get everything that was due to the relatives in this mournful matter. He shook off the dirt from his pants, the sticking fallen leaves, and loaded himself back into the car. When he entered the building, he saw that they had already started lunch and wanted to leave to pick up another time. But suddenly from behind the ajar door of some storeroom, he heard a loud elderly voice, which was calling the number of Molly's grave. Involuntarily, he listened and recognized everything that Christopher, his elderly friend, was telling. On the way home, Liam thought hard. The morning letter and the conversation he had overheard had reopened a fresh wound in his soul, and the pain of losing his wife came to his heart with a new force. For the past month, Liam had been replaying their life together 1,000 times, afraid to find his own fault in what had happened, trying to understand whether it was possible to prevent the monstrous end. But today's events had made him experience, if not hope. No, of course, there could be no hope. But he must, by all means, get to the bottom of it to keep the memory of his beloved bright, to ultimately justify her horrifying act. They met on a rainy late fall day like this. The weather was worse. It couldn't have been worse. A frantic wind was bending the tops of the tall trees, pouring down frequent freezing rain, freezing on the fly and setting crusty, thin ice. Liam was on his way from the sawmill in the country, driving a car with a trailer loaded to the top with wood, and she was standing at a bus stop, deserted at that evening hour, poorly lit by a dim streetlight, a roadside, unsturdy plastic booth that offered little protection from rain or wind. Liam didn't even see her face at that moment. Just being a kind and sympathetic person by nature, he felt sorry for the girl who was probably freezing in the November weather. Buses from the suburbs didn't run very often. It was easy to stand like that for an hour, so he slowed down his Mazda near a tattered sign with a bus schedule, opened the side window and said, or rather shouted, trying to break through the howling wind, "Girl, can I give you a ride?" No. She shook her head, pulling her hood tighter. "Don't be afraid. Why don't you come with me to town? I'll drop you off at the right stop. You'll freeze here. The bus left about 10 minutes ago. The next one won't be here soon." "I'll wait." "Why don't you?" "Then I'll wait for someone else to come and pick you both up. There's still room in the back. I'm on my way home from the sawmill. No luck." He did drive a little farther away and stood on the curb, blinking his emergency lights. After about 3 minutes, there was a knock on the front window of the girl, frozen with blue hands, turned in. "I'm going all the way down." "Where's the Central Market? Do you know it?" "Yeah." Liam nodded. "I can pass there too." "Get in, don't worry. I'm not dangerous." He smiled. She hesitated a little longer, looked into his eyes, appraising him, and suddenly smiled too. And then she fluttered easily into the front seat. "Sorry, my jacket is very wet," the girl said in a guilty tone, shaking off the frozen, icy crust and taking off her hood. She turned to him shyly, smiling. "Thank you." I did miss the bus. That's when he saw her eyes. The sweetest, most stunning in the whole world, dark green eyes in thick lashes, with a bright spark inside, and he fell in love immediately and forever. She was shyly twirling the tip of her thick, honey-colored braid, and on her cheeks glistened like diamonds the ice drops that had melted. He wanted very much to take her to his place and never let her go again, but instead he only asked her politely, "What's your name?" "My name is Liam." "Molly," she answered quietly, not looking at him. But after a few seconds she timidly looked up in the mirror, caught his gaze and smiled shyly again, not wanting to take her attention off the road. Good for her, he thought. And then they drove on in silence. Both were shy and didn't know what else to say. When the road led to a stop, Liam slowed down and asked, "Can I give you a ride somewhere closer to the place?" "No need, thank you," said the girl, smiling gratefully. Her smile every time lit those bright lights in her eyes and drew charming dimples on her cheeks. "You look like you've made a detour enough. I'll go, it's close." And she got out of the car and went about her business, and Liam stood like a fool at the bus stop and watched her go. But when she disappeared behind the corner of gray in the twilight houses, he couldn't stand it, turned off the ignition and rushed after her. When she heard his quick footsteps behind her, she turned around fearfully and stared into the darkness, moving into a lump. "Molly." "Excuse me, Molly. I'm sorry," he mumbled, awkwardly stopping a little ways away. "Let me walk you out after all. It's dark, it's scary. Thank you." He smiled again, but it was barely recognizable in the darkness. He walked along, painfully trying to squeeze out one more word, but could think of nothing. "Here we are," said Molly, stopping at the entrance of a typical apartment building. "This is where I live." "Good," nodded Liam. "Goodbye." "Thank you again." And she pressed the door lock button. The heavy iron door opened with a groan, and Molly disappeared into the dimly lit entryway. Well, that's it, Liam thought. Why am I such a wuss? Sighing, he walked back to the car and got in. He spent 5 minutes pointlessly watching the sagging wires of lampposts swaying in the wind and drove home. Liam had been quiet and shy since childhood. He never got into a fight, though he was physically superior to his peers and could not be called either a wimp or a weakling. He was involved in the school volleyball club, ran city marathons, studied not that brilliantly, rather normal, had no special achievements. Nothing stood out, neither appearance nor talents. It was always difficult for him to make any kind of relationship with his peers, and then with the opposite sex. He did not dare to approach girls. Liam, his mother, also quiet like her son, told him, "Liam, you're so good, so kind. How will you live?" And she stroked his head like in childhood. He hugged her and kissed her graying head. "Somehow, Mom." "Oh," the woman was sad. "Why didn't you get any character from your father?" Liam father, that's who in their family was endowed with character for everyone. With an iron hand he managed the sawmill, where he was a senior in his own house, where literally everything, from the foundation to the furniture, from the fence to the birdhouse, made with his own hands. She taught her son all kinds of work, and above all the art of carpentry. Liam adopted these fatherly qualities to the fullest extent, so when his father, strong and healthy, never complaining about anything, suddenly died of a heart attack, he took over all the household chores that a man should do in the house. It was in the 9th grade, so he and his mother were left alone. They had some savings, which quickly ran out, but Liam's uncle, my father's younger brother, helped a lot. He had worked in a bank all his life and strongly advised his daughter-in-law to invest in a cooperative apartment as soon as possible. So she did, registering it on her son. This saved the father's savings and allowed them to live normally. They rented out the apartment, fed themselves with a vegetable garden and some small livestock. My uncle was a good help. If not for him, Liam and his mother would have had a hard time in those years. Having finished school, Liam did not go to the institute. He studied 3 years at the Automobile Mechanical Technical School. He said that his specialized secondary education was enough for him to work with wood. At first, he worked in the garage, where his father had a beautiful workshop, and after a few years he opened his own company, the construction company Liam and Partners. Business went well, and soon Liam provided work for 12 employees. After a couple of years, he hired an executive director who was engaged in all sorts of routine and left himself only the most urgent functions and work for the soul, restoration of antique furniture, and making various beautiful little things. He still had no girlfriend. Of course, one-time connections happened, but really did not meet with any woman. The employees called him Arbiriak in private, but they loved him affectionately. Liam was a good manager, fair, businesslike, and thorough. He valued people, respected them, and never once allowed himself to raise his voice at his subordinates. As a result, he even became a better boss and businessman than his father once was. He didn't have his father's toughness, it's true, and that didn't stop Liam from achieving success. But at home, he was content with little. His lifestyle was practically the same as before. He did not chase fashion, did not buy expensive cars, and drove his old Mazda. In the office for business meetings, dusted in the closet expensive suit, and the driver polished in the garage black BMW. That evening, when Liam got a ride to the Molly stop, he came home elated. His mother, always waiting for him, no matter how late he returned, saw the change immediately. While her son ate dinner, she sat beside him, looking at him affectionately and quietly. She in general was always so quiet, modest, inconspicuous, discreetly led the household, discreetly picking in the vegetable garden, tended the cattle, never complained, was always a shadow, her bright, assertive husband. Did you finally find her son? She asked Liam when he set aside his empty plate. Yes, he nodded. I found Mom. And smiled a calm, affectionate smile, as he always did. Even in late fall, when some days are mostly gloomy and short, the sun still lights up the streets in the mornings. Albeit briefly, but the more valuable is this early gentle light. It is well known to those who get up early every day. Every morning before work, Molly walked her dog, a small brown dog with funny ears. Rescued a couple years ago from a dumpster where vicious animals had thrown him to die with his littermates. Molly adopted all of them, but kept this one for herself. After all, she had always had cats and dogs at home. And that morning, opening the driveway door, she, as usual, gathered a shorter leash to prevent Chupchiku to run out on the roadway. Who knows what kind of daredevil driver would get caught? But today Chupchik, always running out as if on fire, suddenly braked sharply and barked. Molly saw it a little later than the dog and also stopped in amazement. Right in front of their driveway stood a real carriage, a luxurious, marvelous mint-colored with silver, drawn by a pair of sleek raven horses. In front sat the coachman, in green livery, waving a short whip. As if by magic, the carriage door opened and a young man in a good suit and carrying a basket of snowdrops stepped out. Good morning, Molly. He bowed and came closer to her. Please accept my humble gift. I'm walking the dog, confusedly answered Molly, flapping her eyes. Can I keep you company? Asked the unexpected suitor. Have I seen you somewhere before? Pensively stretched out the girl, and then she realized. You are the same driver with a trailer who took me to the city a week ago. She happily recognized her accidental companion. Liam, is that right? That's right, he bowed again. I didn't dare to ask you to meet me last time, because the atmosphere was not favorable. You were tired, cold, and obviously in a hurry to get home. Now I dare not keep you too long either. I just have one favor to ask of you. Would you agree to dine with me tonight, or any other day that suits you? I'm not busy tonight." Molly laughed. She suddenly felt so at ease. How pleasant it was, this unexpected occurrence on an ordinary November morning. Great! Lion was clearly pleased. Then accept this. He made a sign with his hand, and another man, in plainer clothes, brought a large, beautiful box from the carriage. "We're having a theme night," said Lion. "The carriage will be here for you at 9 o'clock sharp." "Good. I'll be out with Chupchick from 8 till 9:30. "Permission to deviate?" said Lion. "The box and the basket will be waiting for you here when you come back from your walk." And so it came to pass. The carriage was gone, but the man who had come with Lion was waiting for the presents when Molly and Chubby returned home an hour later. He carried them up to Molly's door and then into the apartment, bowed and left. In the box was a gorgeous medieval-style dress, long, embroidered with glittering beads, with a double skirt and flared sleeves of marvelous emerald velvet with gold trim. It fit Molly's slim figure perfectly and suited her well. Looking at herself in the mirror, Molly wondered if there was a catch. Is it worth it to go to an unknown place and a complete stranger, in fact, a person? True, some maniac would hardly splurge on a dress and carriage, but who knows him? Thinking thus, Molly absent-mindedly looked through the box from under the dress and found in it a small card, which she did not notice at once. On it was a picture of a beautiful old building that Molly knew. It was an old nobleman's mansion. In the old days, it had been home to the family of a count who had an estate and a large plot of land in this province, and now it was home to the most luxurious restaurant and hotel in the city. On the back of the postcard was printed the following: "Mr. Liam, CEO of Liam and Associates, invites you, lovely Molly, to a private dinner party to be held on November 16 at 8:30 at Victoria and Albert's. I look forward to seeing you there. Sincerely, Liam," and there was a handwritten signature. When Molly arrived at work that day, at the city's Social Security office, she showed the card to her coworker Clara. "Do you think we should go?" "Wow!" Clara marveled. "How did you do it? After all, this is the same firm, Liam and Associates, that built the new park. A thematic park, visiting a fairy tale, where among the greenery and flowers settled famous fairy tale subjects, skillfully made mostly of wood. Became a gift from this company to the city and a new local attraction. In addition, every weekend here at the expense of the same company, held various charity events. Then children from the orphanage were brought to walk and have fun on the rides for free, then organized sports competitions with prizes from the sponsor. Yes, Molly herself has repeatedly participated in the fair Take a Friend Home, where volunteers adopted dogs and cats from the shelter in good hands. Yes, Molly agreed, and I think I just met their director." "Really?" Clara was interested. "Tell me about it." And Molly told everything as it was, and about today's carriage, and about dresses, and about the basket with snowdrops. "Lucky you, friend," said Clara, listening to her story. "You seem to have drawn a lucky ticket from fate." It was said not enviously, but in a friendly way with sincere joy for Molly. "So you think it's worth it to go?" Molly asked. My God, she's still thinking. Splashed hands, Clara. Listened to her and laughed. However, there was no one to listen to. The two of them were sitting in a tiny office, processing social payments, subsidies, and benefits. Formally, Clara was Molly's boss, but in fact they were good friends, ready, if anything, to help and sympathize. To sympathize with Molly, at least until that day, there was something to sympathize with. She'd been an orphan since she was 10 years old. Her parents were killed in a car accident while returning home from a vacation. Molly didn't go with them that time. She stayed with her grandmother in a small wooden house with a mezzanine buried in the green of gardens not far from the suburbs. Her grandmother brought her up, raised her to adulthood, taught her everything she knew: cooking, sewing, housekeeping, and caring for pets. That's why Molly grew up like a city girl and like a country girl. And in their oldest town, on the big river, there were still a lot of private buildings where people have long lived their own households, like Liam's parents. On the day he'd given her a ride, she'd just come back to town from her grandmother, who left every weekend. Molly, for all her gorgeous looks, was a very modest girl. Cosmetics practically did not use, dressed very simply, in everyone and everything saw first of all kindness and beauty. And people communicating with her revealed their best side. Immediately after school, she experienced an unsuccessful romance, which she did not like to talk about, and since then no one else has not met. Probably, if she had led a different lifestyle, there would be no shortage of suitors. But she just didn't have a place to meet men her own age. After graduating from social college, she went to work in the City Department of Social Security, where both employees and visitors represented quite a different contingent that would be interested in amorous relations. She helped lonely old people, disabled people, and abandoned dogs. I lived in my parents' 3-room apartment, 1 room rented, for a purely symbolic fee to girl students, choosing quiet and not walking. So she lived until she was 25 years old, simple and uncomplicated. Sometimes she and her grandmother sit in the evening near the stove, the old lady on an old chair, with knitting in her hands. Molly, as in her childhood, at her feet on a fluffy mat with a book. It's nice and warm and cozy. The wood is crackling, the flames are dancing, only Grandma, no, and sighs. Molly, my dear, when will you make me happy with great-grandchildren? I don't know, Grandma. You're so beautiful. Don't you have anyone in mind? No, Grandma, except Benjamin. Molly laughs. Benjamin, a regular customer of Molly's social establishment, was a brave 80-year-old soldier, a retired high rank, who for many years half-jokingly, half-seriously gave Molly all sorts of signs of his old man's attention. Molly respected him, steadfastly tolerated long monologues and vain courtship, and did not pay any attention to the constant banter of colleagues. I'll tell you what, said then Grandma, sliding her glasses. Throw you out of the head of this scoundrel. Please, he won't give you peace, and you won't be happy until you forget him. Molly was silent and frowning, and only stroked her grandmother's warm, wrinkled hand. But on this November Saturday, she literally flew in the wicket, ran across the yard, and bursting into the house, whirled the old woman around the kitchen. Grandma, you'll never believe where I was yesterday. Where? Concerned was the one, but to see in her granddaughter's eyes, and joy and delight calmed down. She looked under her blind eyes and saw what she had not expected to find for a long time, a lust for life. Such a joyful and cheerful, a little carefree, was her granddaughter in her youth. When in her senior year of high school, she met a man much older than herself, and they had a stormy, impetuous affair. And when the affair ended, as suddenly as it began, in Molly's eyes, extinguished that joyful fire. Of course, the grandmother then was strongly opposed to Molly connection with a grown man. To think of it, a schoolgirl and a man divorced, God knows what it will lead to. But Molly put up an unexpected and stubborn resistance to all of Grandma's attempts to end this abnormal relationship. How can you not understand? It's love. She fervently argued her position to her grandmother. It is not we who choose the beloved, but our heart, and the heart cannot command. Oh, an unnecessary you in books about love read. The old woman lamented, wiping away her tears. "Look, he will disgrace you, take advantage of you, and leave you." "What will you do then?" "I don't know, Grandma," Molly answered, almost crying too. "But one thing I do know. I can't do without him, you know." "Oh my God!" Grandma was horrified. "What did he do to you?" "How could he?" "At least my mother and father can't see me." "Oh, woe is me!" "Grandma, calm down, please." Molly persuaded her. "I'm not in any danger, you know. He's not forcing me to do anything bad, believe me." "I can only hope so." "What else can I do, Molly? You can love me like you always have, and I'll always love you." Molly hugged her grandmother. "Don't cry, please don't cry." And to convince her grandmother that she was right and safe, she brought her lover home to get acquainted. They were drinking tea and feeling very awkward, all except Ethan. That was Molly's name for the suitor. He was indeed an attractive man, even grandmother had to agree with that. Tall, statuesque, handsome, with a small straight beard, with dark, lively, and intelligent eyes. He certainly made an impression. Any woman would be happy to accept the signs of attention of such an admirer. What to speak of a young girl? Besides, he was obviously not poor and could offer his lady of the heart all sorts of life's goods. "I'm a businessman," he told his grandmother after greetings and numerous assurances of his honest intentions, "and a financier by education. And I worked as a senior accountant at the factory until my retirement." Smiled involuntarily grandmother. And little Molly was always confused, said the dreaded accountant. "So my co-worker," smiled Ethan. And good accountants are a terrible force indeed. Molly was right about that. And he looked affectionately at the girl sitting next to him, pink with happiness. "Believe me, Vanessa, I will not harm your granddaughter in the slightest. My intentions are honorable. I'm ready to marry, and Molly will be securely provided for. Isn't that what you want for your only granddaughter?" And Grandma Vanessa, she gave in. "But he seems like a decent man. He's going to get married. What's the age difference? Maybe it's for the best. What's a young boy who hasn't had his first chance to put up with need? And what with a grown-up, and besides a well-to-do husband, to live in prosperity? It's, as they say, two big differences. Besides, Molly is madly in love, so the grandmother gave her blessing, to the delight of her granddaughter. Although her heart was scraping her hidden suspicions, a secret fear that not everything is as smooth as it seems. For a few months their relations had been going on quite decently. Ethan came, at weekends took Molly to the movies, to the park, brought various guests, grandmother all strictly inspected that nothing unnecessary, no unnecessary luxury. Once she told me to bring back a pocket mirror in a frame. "Why?" protested Molly, who was sorry to part with the gift. "It is not good to carry a mirror with you. Our soul is reflected in it, and God forbid you lose it or break it. It's not good. And what do you look in it? You don't paint your lips, at least I hope you don't. There's no need to correct such beauty. When you get married, you'll be your own mistress. Then you'll decide what to do. But listen to me, it won't be long now." And Molly had to give the mirror back. And so it went from week to week. We met the last Molly, the school Christmas, but she didn't go to the disco anymore. Ethan took her to the theater for an adult play. At the end of the school year, she only went to get her diploma. Even dresses were not ordered dressy. In a school uniform and a white apron, Molly served the solemn ceremony as a necessary duty, and on the graduation party did not even appear. Again with Ethan went to a restaurant. Grandma Vanessa didn't like it all that much. She was grumbling to herself. Takes the joy out of Molly. Once in a lifetime prom. It's not human." But Molly just laughed. "What am I supposed to do there, Grandma? Dance with the boys when my husband's practically waiting for me?" Grandma said nothing, rattling pots and pans in the kitchen. In the summer, she was shocked to hear that Molly and Ethan were going to the seaside together. But no, there was no such agreement. If he gets married, then let him take her wherever he wants to go. Do you know who they take to the seaside without a wedding ring? Grandma, come on. Molly persuaded her. Don't you want me to look at the sea? Yeah, Ethan and I have different rooms at the spa. Stop worrying. I'm begging you. But what's the big deal? Don't you trust me? I don't. Vanessa was tempted to say so, but she held back. She was a wise woman with a lot of self-control. She understood well that one wrong, hurtful word could hurt worse than a knife. You can ruin a relationship for life. So even here she kept silent, although she knew perfectly well how difficult it is for a young, turbulent, boiling, in-love nature to refrain from love attraction, to control her feelings. Ethan was more likely to be a grown-up, experienced man who could handle himself, although Vanessa wasn't sure about him either. That's why she sent Molly to the seas, and everything was boiling in her soul with bad premonitions. But what could she do? Hold her by force, lock her in the house? It would be better not to, only to make trouble on her gray-haired head. What could she do, a weak old woman? Vanessa did not sleep well at night, thinking, tossing from side to side, and during the day she sighed, grumbled, prayed, and mourned until Molly saw her. But she held on. I hope for the best. Hope springs eternal. Let me know when you get there. She told Molly as she walked her to the station. And do not lie under the sun for a long time. Burn or, God forbid, sunstroke. And they also say that in the sea jellyfish can be poisonous. Stop it, Grandma. Molly laughed. What poisonous jellyfish? Oh, sighed Granny. There are enough sea monsters in these seas. Don't worry, Vanessa. Ethan assured her. Just 2 weeks and we'll be back. We'll be fine. Molly's perfectly safe with me, believe me. God be with you. Have a good trip. The old woman said, and just looked at them with sad, tearful eyes. But they came back much later. It so happened that just a few days after their arrival, Molly's appendix was inflamed. The attack happened while she and Ethan were away from the sanatorium, high in the mountains on an excursion. She was brought to the clinic much later than she should have been. And the emergency surgery was difficult, and afterwards the inflammatory process began. Molly spent 3 days in intensive care, in an unstable condition. Her grandmother at home would go crazy with worry, so Molly forbade Ethan to tell her what had happened. They told her later, when it was no longer life-threatening. But for 3 more weeks Molly had to stay in the ward instead of enjoying the sea, the sun, and the delights of the South. She returned home gaunt, haggard, pale, as if she was not at the resort, and in prison. Yes, in fact, the hospital intensive care unit was not much different from a prison, but that was not the worst part. Molly came back alone. She took a cab home from the train station. Without Ethan, she answered her grandmother's perplexed questions with one-word answers. Everyone was more reticent. Of course, Vanessa immediately realized that there was a rift between the lovers. But Molly never told her exactly what had happened, only stated the fact. We broke up, Grandma. It was a mistake. Ethan won't be coming here again. Wise Vanessa stepped back and didn't ask any more questions. At first, of course, she suspected the worst, that the scoundrel had taken advantage of the girl and left her without regret. Vanessa from day to day waited for the appearance of grave consequences, Molly unsuccessful affair. But weeks and months passed, and it became clear that there would be no consequences. Molly was not pregnant. Vanessa breathed a sigh of relief, but although physically her granddaughter had recovered from her illness, mentally she had suffered much more. You can say that she left home a girl, naive, laughing, dreamy, a real maximalist like everyone in her youth. And she came back a wise woman, sad, disappointed. Baba Vanessa had heard her granddaughter sobbing in her room at night, more than once and more than twice. She saw how long she could not fall asleep in the evenings, how her light burned half the night, how something tormented her granddaughter, and how the joy, the young sparkling joy of life, flowed out of her drop by drop. Molly spent the rest of the summer behind the fence, never leaving the house beyond the vegetable garden. Sometimes she would sit on a bench under an apple tree and look, seemed to be looking somewhere. But where can you look farther than the raspberry patch? So she was trying to see something in herself. Vanessa just sighed and prayed. She tried to persuade her granddaughter to go to church, to confess, to take communion, saying that it would be easier if you talked to the Holy Father. But Molly only grimaced. "It's all lies, Grandma. There is no God there, only business." Baba Vanessa stood there, shook her head sadly, and did not make any more such suggestions. At the beginning of August, a small event occurred that revitalized Molly a little. A kitten woke up in their house. It was small and colorful, like a patchwork rug. He came into the kitchen on trembling thin legs and squeaked like a mouse. And he's no bigger than a mouse himself, with a tail as thick as Molly's little finger. What's the matter with the soul? But Molly was so happy to see him, as if she'd met an old friend. "Grandma, look how cute he is. And so colorful, all made of rags." She gave the kitten some milk and put it to sleep in her arms. She sat happily with the tiny cub, eyes burning almost as before that ill-fated trip to the seas. The kitten soon became so attached to Molly that it followed her like a dog and slept in bed with her. And Molly did not like him at all. She named it Musia, because it turned out to be a cat, and Musia grew up to be a hunter to the envy of all. She was a good cat, a rat catcher, which is quite uncommon among their cat tribe. Since that day, when the cat came to them, Molly began to revive. Little by little, she came to herself. She started smiling again, talking about everything, going out of the house. The first time not far to the village store, then and in the city visited on various matters. And at the end of the summer she applied to the Social Technical College and got in. I, Grandma, moved to the city, to the apartment. It's very hard to go to the technical school from here every day. It's a long way. You have to get up at 5 o'clock. "Oh well," Vanessa said. "You have to study, of course, go." She let her granddaughter out of the nest and into the big life. Although it did not happen as planned, but still grew up. In September, Molly turned 18. She and her grandmother collected some money, hired a car, and moved her granddaughter to the city, to her parents' apartment. Grandma Vanessa withdrew money from her account and found a team of craftsmen in the village. They made some repairs in the apartment. Vanessa walked around the familiar rooms and wiped her eyes, tears welling up. The deceased daughter seemed to stand outside the bedroom door as if alive, but no. You open it and the fragile vision dissipates, blurred in the bright electric light. "How will you be alone in here?" Vanessa asked Molly. "Isn't it scary?" "I'll get my own tenants, Grandma. I don't need so many rooms, and maybe you'll change your mind and move in with me," the girl asked hopefully, looking into her native face. Vanessa sighed. "I'd love to, honey, but the vegetable garden and the cattle, Who would I leave them to? They feed us. But when Molly left and took the cat with her, Grandmother became very sad. She bent over the house and garden, not knowing what to do. Everything fell out of her hands. It took her a long time to get used to the fact that now she was all alone in the house. Her granddaughter came only on weekends, and even then not always. One Friday evening it was, near the house, a car stopped. Vanessa thought that Molly had come with some problem and went out to the yard to meet her. She walked along the path to the gate and saw Ethan standing near the car. "Hello, Vanessa," he said politely. "Is Molly home?" "And don't you get sick," the woman replied, frowning. "Molly doesn't live here anymore." "Why not?" Ethan asked in surprise. "None of your business." Vanessa cut her off and walked back down the path. "Wait, Vanessa!" Ethan shouted after her. There was real desperation in his voice. "Wait, please." Vanessa turned around and looked at him questioningly, tentatively. "What else do you want?" But she didn't come any closer. "I really need to see her. For God's sake, tell me how to find her." He came close to the wooden fence and, ignoring the dirt, leaned against it, wrapping his arms around the boards. He looked at her with a pleading gaze, but Vanessa did not soften. "You have deceived and tormented an innocent soul, you wretch." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Let your spirit be no more here." And she went back inside. But since that time she had seen a black car with its headlights off, not far from the house. The windows were covered with mud, so you couldn't see what was inside. But Vanessa was sure Ethan was inside, waiting for Molly to show up. "Ah, murderer." She scolded slowly when she saw him again. "That's how you have blackness inside, like on your glass, and you can't see it at once. You hide it, you monster." She wanted very much to warn her granddaughter, to tell her that Ethan had come, but she did not dare to hurt Molly. And, of course, she realized that sooner or later, since the scoundrel had reappeared, he would see Molly. It was not for nothing that she sat and waited, like a spider in a web. But I was afraid he'd take her away by force, snatch her away in the night. It's a quiet and deserted alley that leads to a dead end. So she went to the local policeman and complained that he was sitting near the house, scaring her, not letting her live peacefully. Well, it seems the district officer talked or something else took action. Vanessa did not inquire any more, but the car did not stand in their alley anymore. A few more months went by. Molly still showed up on weekends, still quiet, still behaving as usual. Ethan never showed up, so she concluded she'd blown him off. Good girl. A few years had passed since then, and the events of those long ago moved away, entailed, and no longer disturbed her grandmother. Molly studied at the technical school, began to work, became interested in volunteering in shelters for pets. The kitty, by the way, after some time brought back from the apartment. I felt sorry for her, Grandma. She explained to Vanessa. All day long she sits on the windowsill, looking at the street, at the birds. Once she almost fell out of the window. She would have crashed from the 7th floor. So let her live here at home where she's used to, where she's bored alone all day long. Of course, agreed Grandmother, stroking satisfied Musia. She's used to running around in the wild. Everyone needs freedom, every living soul, and you won't be so bored alone during the week. Molly smiled. Well, I'm at work. I'm not bored here. Vanessa shrugged it off, but she was really glad Musia was back. Though wordless, but still their own native animal. He would come and paw at her feet, jump into her arms, and sing songs. Grandmother sits by the fire and thinks different thoughts under the cat's songs. Mostly, of course, about her granddaughter. Vanessa was very worried about her. Though Ethan, as it seemed to her, had been finished long ago, something had broken in Molly since then. She was as affectionate and friendly as before, but she didn't get close to anyone, and she didn't have a single friend. Acquaintances don't count. For example, a colleague from work, Clara, it would seem that every day together, the whole life as in the palm of her hand. But no, and her Molly was not allowed to her soul, and about her unhappy romance preferred not to tell. Even Vanessa still didn't know how and why they'd gotten so upset. Molly avoided the subject with a stubborn silence, no matter how many times her grandmother tried to gently prod her for details. Finally, the Vanessas backed off. What was that has passed and bygone. It is not worth stirring up smoldering embers, so as not to inadvertently fan the hot fire. It's more likely. The embers have burned out by now. At least Vanessa hoped so. But Molly never met anyone else, never talked about her personal life, and never brought home any guy she knew. Vanessa grieved. She would not wait for her grandchildren. She would not see her granddaughter's life. Therefore, on that late autumn Saturday morning, when Molly with burning eyes, with ruddy cheeks burst into the house, grandmother's loving heart trembled with joyful anticipation. "Molly, my darling." She hugged her granddaughter and stroked her cheek affectionately. "And I made pancakes. Want some? With cherry jam?" "I will." Molly responded enthusiastically. "Of course I will." Vanessa was happy and began to work in the kitchen, giving her pet various treats. Molly, who had been eating like a bird lately, had a great appetite this morning, much to her grandmother's delight. She laughed, joked, and rejoiced in every little thing like a schoolgirl. Grandmother wondered, and it all cleared up when the table was cleared, and Molly told her about last night's adventure and her acquaintance with Liam. From the very first time they'd met, when he'd given her a ride into town, picking her up from a cold bus stop. "Can you believe it, Grandma?" Molly said, glowing. "Me and Chubchick, we come out of the entrance, and there's a carriage. The very real carriage, like from a fairy tale about Cinderella. You should have seen it." Vanessa laughed and marveled. The story was incredibly beautiful. And grandmother listened attentively, while Molly told and told about her date with the handsome prince, looking far away through the window. The carriage pulled up to the restaurant building. The huge, gaudy Victoria and Albert's lettering gleamed on the ancient facade, obscuring the skillful bas-reliefs. Molly faintly wrinkled her nose, and it didn't escape her companion's attention. "I don't like it either." Trustingly, he informed her, leaning toward her. "But that's all right. Perhaps things will change soon." Dinner was amazing, like a fairy tale. They had the whole fireplace room to themselves, decorated in the pre-revolutionary manner. A fire burned in the huge fireplace, lined with white stone. Everywhere hung pictures in gilded frames. There were luxurious vases, carved statuettes, and bronze candlesticks with wax-weeping candles. In the far corner nestled a large grand piano, beautifully inlaid and with an open lid. As soon as they entered the hall, live music began to play. A small orchestra near the piano played a lovely old melody on stringed instruments, and a waiter in white gloves greeted them solemnly, escorting them to the table. The dinner passed off admirably. Liam was gallant and polite. Molly felt like a fairy princess, and when he took out of the inner pocket of his expensive tailsuit a velvet box with a gold ring, she even wept from surprise. Liam had proposed to her. He was ready to marry her at any moment. "That's how it is, Grandma." The girl finished her story. "And what did you decide?" Vanessa asked, looking thoughtfully at her granddaughter. "I don't know yet." Embarrassed, Molly answered, "It's all so sudden." "Come out. Suddenly the grandmother said confidently, "Come out, honey, and don't even think about it." "How, Grandma?" Molly marveled. "How can you say that? You haven't even seen him once." "So," Vanessa responded, "but I feel perfectly well, having heard your story, that he is a good man, a whole man. Such people are not on the road, Molly." Molly herself felt that Liam was the one she would be like a stone wall behind. During the remaining month and a half before Christmas, they met several times, went for walks with Chubchick, went skiing, even had a tour at Liam's workplace. And of course they met a few relatives. Liam organized a party together. His mother was much closer to Molly, the grandmother, as she aged than to her parents would have been had they been alive. The two older women found common ground easily and quickly, and that same day, with tears of joy, blessed their children with a happy life together. The wedding was scheduled for the end of March. "Liam, please don't have a lavish ceremony," Molly said. "I am even afraid to imagine how much that fabulous dinner cost and how many good deeds could be organized with that money." Quietly, she added, worrying how her chosen one would take this soft criticism. "How good you are!" Only instead he hugged her. "Everything, you know, just the kind of wife I needed. But still once in my life, I had to arrange something grand for my beloved, and it worked." He looked jokingly into her eyes. "Oh, come on." Molly laughed involuntarily. All right, it helped." And she put her arms around his neck, giving him her most tender kiss. That was the deal. No frills, a modest ceremony at the marriage institution, and a wedding in the temple. The latter was particularly pleasing to both Liam and Molly. It was a balm to the soul. Then a festive dinner was planned, in the same restaurant and in the same hall, for all the nearest and dearest. There were only a few people: Molly's grandmother, her cousin, an old man who helped her and Molly while they were still strong, a couple of Vanessa's close friends' neighbors, a few of Molly's friends from the volunteer center, and above all Clara's colleague. On Liam's side, of course, Mom, a few close relatives and 3 of his co-workers, the executive director, the chief accountant, and the senior foreman. Get acquainted. This is my 3-headed dragon. This is how he jokingly introduced his assistants to Liam, his future wife, when they first met. We've been through fire, water, and copper with them. If it weren't for these wonderful, in every way people, I wouldn't have made it. The wedding went as smoothly as it could have. The charming bride in a simple white dress with a small hairpin and veil, and the personable groom, in a dark blue suit, made a lovely couple. Liam was not a fatal beauty, unlike Ethan. The simplest European face, honest, without any double bottom. But happiness made his face truly beautiful. Besides single until now, the owner of a well-known company, a man of wealth, and not prone to the usual vices of rich idlers, he was, no doubt, the most enviable party in town. But to Molly, his fortune was not the decisive factor. Rather, character, similarity of thought, lifestyle. They'd both been brought up in a strict, no-frills upbringing. They knew from their own experience how money was made and knew its real value. Both Molly and Liam, without collusion, had the same idea, instead of going on a honeymoon, to make a serious donation to the needy. Thus, the city orphanage, a nursing home, a hospice, and a perinatal center received huge sums of money. Molly, on the other hand, received from her husband the most wonderful gift she could imagine. Liam gave her her own dog shelter. That's how their life together began, fun and easy. Molly never asked anything from her rich husband, nor did she change anything in her lifestyle, having married and become the wife of one of the most influential people in town. except that she no longer worked at the Social Security office. Benjamin, her former boss, was not comforted, but hundreds of homeless, offended by fate and people, who had not known love and care before furry and tailed pets got their fairy. Molly ruled her kingdom with a loving but firm hand. At the end of the year, another joyous event happened to the young family on Christmas Eve. Molly and Liam learned that they were expecting a child. That's right, they found out together. They'd always done everything together. And when Molly suspected a new little life inside her, she didn't even think of going to the doctor alone. "We have to find out together," she told her husband. Of course, agreed Liam, and they went to the doctor. Well, let's see. The monitor of the ultrasound machine was turned to them. And there's our little prince. The news of a grandson and great-grandson made both mother and grandmother sob with happiness. And the first words they both uttered were exactly the same. "At last, I couldn't wait. Molly, my baby." Grandma Vanessa wiped her tears with the tip of her handkerchief. "Take care of yourself, my dear. Don't overwork yourself. Take your vitamins." Yes, Grandma," Molly agreed, smiling and wiping away her tears. She was both happy to see her grandmother's happiness and bitter that time spared no one. How long had it been since Granny was still a sturdy young woman? "Oh, long ago," Molly answered herself. "And I was just finishing elementary school, and suddenly I was crying harder than my grandmother." Liam and Vanessa got worried and put her on the couch, ran in and brought her some valerian. "It's all right." Molly, who had cheered up after a few minutes, calmed them down. "It was just hormones. Wait till I start eating plaster and demanding chestnut pudding in the middle of the night, and you'll get it as soon as you want it," her husband assured her. "Now get some rest." Molly's pregnancy flowed easily, not even a leg cut off, and almost no toxicosis, all term excellent tests. So the news that their baby boy is down took everyone by surprise. "But he's practically healthy," Molly said desperately as she unwrapped the diapers. "He doesn't look sick at all." "What? What's wrong with him?" "You see," the woman doctor coughed awkwardly, "for a while it will seem like he's no different from any other baby. But soon the mental and physical retardation will become apparent, even outwardly. A child with Down syndrome is easy to recognize. They all kind of look the same." "Nonsense," Molly objected vehemently. "He looks like Liam. There's the eyes and the nose." She lowered her head and cried. "Molly, my dear," Liam came to her. "Calm down, please. We'll get through this. The main thing is that we're together." Yes, it can be cured, can't it?" "We'll cure it." Molly was happy with her new thought. "What do you think, doctor?" "It's a disease caused by a genetic malfunction." The doctor began carefully. "A chromosomal abnormality, quite common, by the way. There are methods to train the intellect. Some of the patients can live long enough. Others are even capable of limited work activity." Molly wasn't listening to her anymore. She was absorbed in her baby. She swaddled him again, held him close to her, sang a lullaby in his ear, whispered something softly. Finally, resolutely, she said to her husband, "Let's go home, Liam. The walls help at home. William and I can manage. You'll see." "Of course we will." Liam put his arm around his wife and gently, supporting her by the shoulders, led her out of the study. For 2 long years they had been getting used to the fact that they were parents of an invalid child. 2 years of their lives were spent on endless tests, studies and exercises, infusion, lapping, physiotherapy, homeopathic treatment, and other procedures. The bottom line loomed one way. Their William, their son, their firstborn, would never become a full human being. All of Liam's money, or should I say, all of the world's money, was powerless to solve this small problem, the size of a single chromosome. Molly's cheerful optimism lasted just about that long. By William's second birthday, she was off the rails. "What can I get you, darling?" Liam had asked her the day before. "What's the occasion?" Molly grumbled unhappily. "What's that? What's the occasion?" "The birth of our son." Liam smiled. "Oh, that." Molly grinned mournfully. "Give him a new chromosome set, a whole one, not broken." "What, you can't?" She shrieked, seeing the judgment and sadness in her husband's eyes. "And I thought you were all-powerful. The great Liam. Look at him. He can buy everything, but not what is really needed." She was screaming at the top of her voice. Then she was hospitalized in a neurological clinic for the first time. However, the name neurological did not quite reflect the essence of what was going on here. The patients were wealthy lunatics, roughly speaking, as well as wealthy alcoholics, drug addicts, and those with other related conditions. She came back quiet, lost, broken. She should never have been allowed to carry this burden alone. Said Liam, the chief physician of this forlorn institution, a low, dense man with tired and intelligent eyes. "Even with a normal infant, it's very hard on the mother without help. It is physically terribly exhausting. What to speak of such children? Have you not thought to look for a nanny? Or preferably two, a regular au pair and a masseuse nurse?" Molly was admitted in this condition primarily due to daily exhaustion. Consider that she hasn't had a decent night's sleep in 2 years. That would kill anyone. Plus the constant realization of her own powerlessness. This has to be dealt with, and quickly. But I kept suggesting that she find an assistant. Liam was confused, but she doesn't want to. She thinks she has to do everything for her son by herself. "No, no," the doctor said resolutely, smoking a cigarette. "This is absolutely impossible. A little more of this regime, and she will become a regular client of our clinic. Do you understand?" Liam was suppressedly silent. "But before discharge, let me give you some advice of a personal, so to speak, nature. May I speak frankly? Of course, your son will never recover. You need to accept that fact and move on, not try to find a magic cure, because there isn't one. Get him a good nurse, be happy with your wife that you can afford it, and make sure you have another baby. Believe me, you have a good chance of making it happen. Just because your first baby was born this way doesn't mean the next one will be abnormal. I'm sure it doesn't. I'm sure it doesn't." "Thank you." "Heavy," sighed Liam. "I wish I could explain all this to my wife. It's impossible while she's like this. She needs rest. The best thing to do now is to take her away to rest, to take her mind off everything and make her feel better." "You know, Emmanuel," Liam cheered up, "that's a wonderful idea." "Yes, it is." The doctor nodded. "That's exactly right. Go far away, somewhere where there is no communication, preferably. Are you suggesting we leave William to a stranger and go on vacation?" Molly looked indignantly at Liam. "I'm not suggesting it, sweetheart. I'm putting you on notice." Liam replied firmly, "Understand it's necessary. Your doctor said you won't get better otherwise. You need rest. How can I rest, knowing that my son is suffering here alone, and he needs his mom, and his mom left him and went on vacation? What are you talking about, Liam?" And Molly cried. "Molly, he won't be at home and he won't be alone. He will be in good hands in a specialized clinic where he will be given proper care." "Proper care? Will they give him love? A mother's love that can't be replaced. Yes, he won't even recognize himself." Liam got angry. "Don't you realize that? He smiles at me. Molly said quietly, smiling. That's all he can do, smile. He can't say what he's thinking or ask you and me for anything. He can only smile when he feels good. And he only does it with me. Darling, Liam sank down in front of her right on the floor, hugged her knees and pulled her to him. My darling, understand. He's sick, he's very sick, and he'll never get better. And you and I will have more children. Let go. In an icy tone, Molly said, Let me go now. That was the end of their conversation. However, Liam still managed to break his wife's stubborn resistance. With the help of Emmanuel, pumped with sedatives, Molly was put on a plane and taken. They told me here that such special children. She said it now quite calmly. Hippotherapy is very helpful. Can we buy him a little pony? Of course we will. Liam agreed happily. And I was thinking maybe we should move to a bigger house. We could have everything set up for William. A gym, a swimming pool, a room for a nurse, and a lawn for hippotherapy. What do you think? I say I have the best husband in the world. Molly hugged him. The silver iron bird carried them to their homeland. Here already showed the lights of the city, where they have a change to another plane. They landed, clapped to the pilots, served the gangway. Sit here, darling. Order yourself a coffee. Liam took his wife to a small airport cafe. I'll deal with our luggage and call a cab. Okay, but you won't be long. Molly smiled. The phone rang as soon as Liam switched it from airplane mode. Liam, good evening. It's from the clinic. We're very sorry. We've done everything we can. Your son. Cardiac arrest? Yes, all the necessary resuscitative measures were taken. Believe me, we grieve with you. We've already given the autopsy and medical results to your representative. When are you coming back? Okay, we'll get everything ready. Liam ended the call and stopped in the middle of the busy airport lobby. He was flanked on all sides by people in a hurry to leave or return. How would he and Molly get back now? His hands clenched helplessly. The phone fell to the cold, hard tiles of the floor and shattered. Are you still there, darling? Liam tried to speak as briskly as possible. Sorry, I got held up. Can you believe I smashed my phone in the commotion? Oh, it's nothing. Come on, there's a cab waiting. All the way from one airport to the next, where they were to fly home, Molly chattered on and on about how well they were going to organize everything in the new house. What kind of flooring to put around the pool so it wouldn't be slippery, how William's room would be set up, the must-have bathroom with a ramp and directly adjacent to the bedroom. A staff call button by each bed, and in the restroom, and on and on and on. In the little airplane that was taking them to their hometown, she was tired and fell asleep. And Liam kept thinking this way and that, thinking how to tell her this terrible news. I should consult Emmanuel. He would tell me what to do. Oh, my phone is broken. All my contacts are there. They're home at last. Now they'll put her to rest and find the doctor's phone. Liam, Molly, you're finally back. I've been crying my eyes out. What a grief, but life went on. We'd had to work, move on. The house was now quiet, dusky, uncomfortable. There were 2 shifts, 2 caregivers with Molly around the clock. Liam's mother was at her side, quietly crying and praying. He himself spent most of his time at the office. He'd come home at midnight. He would ask the nurses how the day was going and go straight to his room. But one morning, Molly woke up unusually lively, ate well, smiled, and asked about Liam. Do you want him to come? The nurse asked her. Yes, let him come. Molly nodded. I want to tell him something. When the worried Liam entered the house, she herself ran out to meet him, smiling, bright and happy. "Liam, where are you getting to? Come on, we need to talk. You know, my love," she began as they made their way into the living room. "I had a dream about William today. Yeah, just like he was alive. No, don't worry." She raised her hand in a warning gesture. "I know perfectly well now that he's no longer with us. But he was so joyful, so real, you know? And most of all, he walked and talked like a normal child. You know what that means? It means that where he is now, he's happy. And that means I'm happy. Don't you, dear?" asked Liam, looking into her eyes. He was surprised and pleased by his wife's reaction. "Really, Liam," Molly answered firmly. "I want to clean myself up and get on with my life. Tell those minders to get out of our house. I'm well now, and I don't want to see strangers here." "Very well," agreed Liam. He took both women into another room and asked them to rest for a while, to take a break. "We'll see," he said to them. "How will things go?" "I wouldn't trust such a sudden change if I were you," said the older of the two. "Believe me, these patients can be very cunning at times. If I want your opinion, I will ask for it." Liam answered her rudely. He remembered well how well the treatment had worked last time. Why shouldn't the same thing happen now? After all, it had been so long. Molly had really cleaned herself up. She went to the beauty salon, did a new hairstyle, went shopping, bought some little things and a beautiful light-colored dress, and even had a manicure and pedicure. "How do you like me?" She smiled at her husband. "Nothing? It's great. You're the most beautiful." He was as happy as a child. That afternoon, evening, and even night, they had a wonderful time. Everything, absolutely everything, seemed the same as before. In the morning, when Molly saw Liam off to work, she made breakfast and told him she was going to work at the orphanage. She said she really missed her tailed angels. "Don't stay out too late, or you'll be exhausted." He kissed her and drove off to the office completely happy. "Don't worry, I'll be here when you get back," his wife promised him and waved goodbye. She really was here, had been, and hadn't left for any orphanage. She was here while Liam, soothed by her fake normalcy, was at work. Still was, while he was on his way home. The doctor at the morgue then said it all happened some 15 minutes before he returned. He walked into the house and called out cheerfully, "Molly, where are you, darling?" "I'm home." No one answered. He walked into the living room and saw her hanging in a noose from the chandelier hook. She was there. And yet, she was gone. It was over for him in that instant, everything. All joy, all sorrow, all love, all pain, all life. He no longer felt anything, no longer remembered eating, no longer remembered drinking, no longer remembered what he had done yesterday or the day before. No, he hadn't gone on a bender. He had gone inside himself, and only one simple action occupied him now. He had to visit Molly's grave every day, and he did. With fanatical regularity, arriving at the same time at the town cemetery, where two plaques hung on a simple wooden cross, his son William's and his wife Molly's. That was why he was so angry, that stupid letter the courier had brought. And then there was the conversation he'd unwittingly overheard in the cemetery. Enough. He decided suddenly. Enough of this torment. I won't bring her back from the other side. It's over. A strange thought occurred to him at the same time he made that decision. It must have been Dr. Emmanuel who had decided to shake him up in this way. But this was too much. Liam was angry again and turned the car around abruptly and drove not home but to the clinic. But there he was told that Dr. Feldman was now on vacation and would return only in 2 weeks. Then he had already set himself up internally for some kind of active work. He went to his office, where he hadn't been since the day his wife died. "Good afternoon, Kelly." He said hello to his secretary, a trim woman in her 50s. "Good afternoon, Liam." She was both surprised and delighted. "Would you ask all the department heads and Miranda to see me, please?" Sure. Liam, can I get you some coffee?" "Yes, please." Liam entered his office wistfully, looked around it. It was dark, dusty. It hadn't been cleaned in days. "Kelly." He went back out into the waiting room. "Get the cleaning lady to clean it up, too." He nodded at the office door. "And invite everyone to the conference room." "I'll wait there." The conference room was more cheerful. Liam sat down at the long polished table, sighed, and looked out the window. When he looked out, he absent-mindedly looked around and found a newspaper left by someone right in front of him. It was lying backwards, where they print short advertisements and crossword puzzles. So-and-so was doing a crossword puzzle. Turning over the printed matter, he saw on the front page a large, practically full-page photograph, and above it a caption in large letters, "Scandal at the Protestant New Path Artel." Teenagers were victims of sexual abuse by a pastor. Liam wrinkled his nose in annoyance. The yellow press. Suddenly his attention was drawn to a face in a common photo. Among the several sectarians in the picture, he suddenly recognized Molly. When the conference room staff arrived, Liam was already speeding down the highway, away from the city, to the neighboring state where the New Way Artel was located. When he arrived, he literally jumped out of the car and burst through the door of a small structure at the front of a huge fenced-in, high fence. The room at the entrance was full of people, mostly police and journalists. "Where are you going?" One of the policemen stopped him. "You can't come in here. There are investigations going on here." "My wife is here," shouted Liam. "I have to take her away. The sectarians, if that's what you mean, they've all been taken out of here." It was explained to him. "They're at this address. It's a former orphanage. They're being treated there, and they're looking for relatives." He didn't finish listening, grabbed a piece of paper with the address, and flew out of the building like a bullet. It took him a long loop through the unfamiliar city, looking for the right house, and finally he got there. "Is this where the ex-cultists are?" "Yes. Are you a relative? Come with me." A woman dressed as a nurse led him inside. "Here we have rooms for those who can't walk or are on drugs after withdrawal." They were mostly on drugs, and there, she waved her hand. Right down the corridor is the canteen and a large hallway, look too. Liam rushed out, peering at faces, turning each lying patient, not hoping for a resemblance. The woman in the picture had short and dark hair, but undoubtedly Molly's face. The search took him a long time. Another sister came in and began to help him, calling people by name, telling him about them, giving details. And then Liam had an epiphany. He pulled a picture of Molly out of his jacket. "Look, please, do you recognize her?" "Yes." The sister nodded. "That's Agnes. That's what she calls herself. Come on, she's probably in the hall." "Right? There she is." "Molly?" Liam couldn't believe himself, touched the shoulder of the woman sitting with her back to them by the window. She turned around, and he almost fell off his feet. It was indeed his wife. Emanuel Feldman was sitting in his office, comfortably sprawled in an armchair. Opposite him was his close friend and colleague who had come to consult with a rare patient. "Yes, your case is certainly interesting." Feldman said to him, "But you know, Robert, I have a story to tell too." There's a story that came out recently. It was in all the papers, as they say, but only a few people know the true state of affairs like this. And he told his friend the story of patient Molly from the day she first came to his clinic to the day she supposedly died. Yes, that's right, imaginary. Can you imagine, Robert? Her husband pulled her out of the noose himself. He was heartbroken. Who'd have thought it was just an elaborate staging? Turns out her old lover found out years later about the tragedy with their child. He'd been following her, and on the day she'd made her decision, he'd also been nearby, saw her husband leaving, climbed into the house, twisted her up, drugged her, put her in a noose just before he arrived, but tied the rope so it wouldn't do her much harm. But she looked really dead. He faked a respiratory arrest. You know that's possible, right? How did he do it? Oh, it was a clever con man. A criminal David Copperfield indeed. He used to be a banker, but then his business went under and he organized this infamous sect, which was recently shut down. He forgot himself, he thought he was God, and he crossed the line. He became a monster. So when he killed her like that, he arranged with the orderlies in the morgue, and the body was replaced by a dead girl from his sect. And he took his victim back to his lair, to this new path. She didn't need drugs to keep her there. She was already completely out of it after losing her child. Gladly, you might say, accepted the rules of the new game. She adapted there, called herself Anne's, but one day she managed to write and send a letter to her husband. That's where it all started, actually. She must have felt subconsciously that she was not in her normal life. You understand me, don't you, Robert? Oh, yes, my colleague agrees. We're just beginning to understand the mysteries of our subconscious. How bizarrely life sometimes weaves its threads, and we as silly moths fly to the false light of a distant lantern, not noticing these invisible obstacles. But often we get hopelessly entangled in them, breaking our wings, destroying our lives. A few years later, when all their old life had faded a bit, and they had already started anew, Molly and Liam were sitting on the veranda of their big house and cradling their newborn twins, a boy named Vanya and a girl named Mila. Liam, I was so worried that it might happen again. Thank you for convincing me to have these adorable babies. I'm happy, my love. I'm so happy. We will never be disturbed, you promise me. Liam nodded his head reassuringly. His Molly was now safely protected from anything that could hurt her. He had managed it. He had freed her and brought her back to life.
Subscribe and click the bell.
A pedigree cat in good hands, age 9 years. She's a mountain cat, eats premium dry food. Call the number. Maria shuddered. She was so struck by the photo of a white cat, which looked from the phone screen with the eyes of her favorite. The cat Charlie, with whom the girl was inseparable since childhood, recently died, and the cat in the picture was incredibly like him. The girl read the ad again, then gazed at the image of the kitty, thought and dialed the indicated number. Hello, hello. I'm calling from the ad about your cat. I'd love to see her. You see, she looks just like my dead cat. You'd think we cloned him. Hello, you're welcome to visit us anytime. The woman on the other end of the line had a nice, low-pitched voice. I think you'll like my Marquesa. She's very smart. Maria noticed that the woman seemed sad or tired. It turned out to be a short drive right halfway to Maria's work. Arranged a time to meet. Maria didn't want to put things off and drove to the specified address right after work the very next day. A strange excitement swept over her, as if meeting someone else's cat was something special and decisive. When she found the right entrance, she stood for a minute, inhaled deeply and resolutely went inside. There was a tiny rug by the door of the right apartment. It was clean. She pressed the bell, and a very thin woman of small stature opened the door. Good evening. It's me, Maria. You remember from the ad? Yes, of course. Come in, please. I invited a guest. The woman walked forward. Maria noted that her gait was not firm, like a completely alive person, an underground atom of the corridor. Passed into the room. In a small apartment of the old type stood hospital sterility and emptiness. No furniture, no appliances hung on the chairs or scattered clothes not personal without girls, or those not too necessary things, which and promolu dwelling coziness. Even the curtains on the windows looked poor and temporary. From some cheap and frivolous matter, this house would appear uninhabitable. If his mistress in a white kerchief had not sat down opposite Maria on a small sofa, having previously made an inviting gesture not without shyness. Maria looked at her. That looked haggard, bloodless face, as if the countenance from an icon, make yourself comfortable, said meanwhile the woman Adriana, and here is our Marquise. She led her hand to Maria immediately at the entrance, already saw this incredible picture. The large white cat was sitting on the only chair by the sofa where the hostess and Maria were sitting. She looked like a majestic statue. The void around it especially enhanced the impression. The cat looked at the girl, studying it first, and then shifted her gaze to the woman in the headscarf, as if demanding an explanation from her. Maria, too, was scrutinizing Marquise. "Hello, Marquise," she said. "Quiet. You are very beautiful." Tears came to her eyes and the girl was silent. Adriana nodded understandingly, pulling herself together. Maria turned to her. "Are you leaving or?" She smiled sadly, but it could be taken that way. She remained silent for a moment. It was evident that the explanation was not easy for her. "I love her very much," but Adriana slowly pulled the headscarf off her head and exposed a completely smooth skull. Oncology. The last course of chemotherapy was in vain. There's no point in having surgery. Not 6 months left. Maria, stunned, remained silent. That's why her voice is so awful, her face so pale. That's what the scarf hides. What can I say? You know, I've grown tired of the thought. Adriana went on. Is it true that one gets used to everything? At first, the news is like a lightning strike, and then you have to get on with your life. You can't go to the coffin alive. She grinned bitterly. The two women felt sympathy for each other from the first words and continued to talk about some unimportant things. Strangers seemed to have nothing in common. But two lonely people needed warm companionship. Meanwhile, Marquise jumped from her chair and approached them, lost her feet Adriana, then raised her muzzle to Maria and flashed. "Friends," Adriana predicted and smiled. "But you know, Maria, it's complicated. I think you'll understand. I have to go to the hospital soon. Until then, I'd like to keep Marcus with me for 2 weeks. Do you mind? And you'll come over after work. You'll get used to each other." "Of course I don't mind. Let him stay, of course." Maria left to visit her new friend and her cat during the agreed time. She was anxious, but at the same time lightened up after this meeting. This evening filled her with memories. With all her heart sympathizing with Adriana, she involuntarily compared her fate with someone else's. Thought of loneliness. The girl realized that attachment to an animal is not a bliss, not the whim of a sick person. Her cat Shirley, who had literally grown up with her in her old age, had become quite infirm. Coming in the evening from the realtor's office, where she worked as a lawyer to formalize transactions, Maria, sadly looking into his sad eyes, watched almost human clumsy movements, his paws, which Soen wanted to call pedagogical. And no vitamins could help him anymore. Veterinarian, to which Maria in despair took the pet, only sympathetically sighed and offered, "Well, Davabushka, your cat is still long-lived. I am not God, and give him a second life cannot, but to alleviate his suffering can." He cast a glance at Maria, whose eyes rolled involuntary tears. "It'll be easier for you. 1 injection, and the patient will go into a soft, eternal sleep. Believe me, it's the best thing we can do for him." Maria refused. She walked home. The two of them stoically endured the difficult months, without words understanding each other. The cat lay there exhausted, not wanting to eat. He wouldn't eat. Only his gaze was understanding or goodbye. The girl cried, turning away. She was sure that Fluff would feel her despair if she showed him her tears. And one evening, when the mistress came home, found her Fluffy. The comrade had already calmed down for good, as if he tried to ease the suffering of his mistress. Maria spared neither strength nor time to take the fragmented and lost Soft on the left pet's body to a distant abandoned house to bury him near her favorite lilac bushes, where once long ago they had spent many happy hours with the whole family. She was left all alone. The girl was coming back from the half-destroyed fence of the old dacha, limping a little and talking to herself. Now there was no one to talk to. We have to do something. We have to live somehow. Somebody's cat and somebody's best friend. It's not my fault I'm alone. I've got to live. So talking to herself, she reached the entrance, where the train stopped under the clatter of wheels and conversations. She looked out the dirty window and decided to take the cat. In the province, a lonely person can be seen at once. Neighbors know almost everything about him, everyone in sight. The fate of a loner in a big city is unenviable, especially if the character of the person is peculiar. Maria was a kind and intelligent girl, but the childhood trauma left her with a slight, almost imperceptible literacy on one leg. And here with this complex, she never managed to cope in the distant youth of a romantic young lady. She had the misfortune to fall in love with a kid from the neighborhood, Ethan, black hair and swarthy. He looked like a gypsy. He had incredible charm. They call it charisma nowadays. He was a gung-ho, desperate soccer player. A couple of yard games have not left yet, and Maria could stealthily watch the boys, pretending that she was interested in the game and not one of the players. Girlfriends and petite boys were squealing, yelling. Maria, too, was in this crowd of admirers and caught Ethan's every move. Dark-skinned bodies took off in a run. The boy's supple torso was a source of admiration. Ethan was always surrounded by a crowd of younger kids. He was their idol. I don't know his character or his habits. Ethan. Maria fell in love just with his appearance, so lively, filled with vitality. Boyish face with dark eyebrows, was thin and spiritualized. In moments of play or lively conversation, Maria wanted to stare at him and just admire him. She stood at the window overlooking Ethan's driveway for a long time, trying to track his exit and jump out as if to the neighboring department store for groceries, exactly at the moment when Ethan would approach her house. Too often, she started to get in the way of the boy. At 13, girls still do not know the sense of proportion. What can I do? Hey, you. He called out to her one day. What's your name? Maria felt like she'd been doused with ice water. That's the moment when the boy he adored noticed her. But as he noticed, just her temple. She was the one who ran straight home and didn't even cry, only stopped looking in Ethan's direction. After that, the girl would run through the yard as quickly as possible. If there was a soccer game, Maria never let herself think about men again. Complexes acquired in adolescence often remain in a person for life. Her parents were a late child, and they looked upon her as a child. Not really that, delving into her mental space, her childhood crush remained unnoticed by anyone. And brought up on books, Maria closed herself off in a cozy hallway of music and novels of household chores near her mother. Daughter, don't you want to go to the movies? Her mother, Wendy, asked her. And our savings bank girls told us a new movie is going on. People are coming in droves. Being aware of the news from her young colleagues, the old lady began to worry that her daughter was always alone. She felt somewhat guilty about the time Maria fell off her bike and hurt her leg. Although Wendy and her husband had then done everything possible for their daughter, her mother's heart ached. Of course, the blame for the aftermath fell entirely on the doctors who sent them home after surgery and treatment, saying it would all go away in time. Working out, sea, sun, and good nutrition will help. The elderly couple took their daughter to the sea as they lived frugally and could spend for the sake of her health, and nutrition was out of the question. All the best, Maria. All in all, Maria was the one unique flower in the family garden. Wendy herself married quite late for the daughters still, and the girl's daughter spoke parents for their good modest accountant, who until 40 years old took care of his sick mother and remained single. The new family took shape. The spouses were completely satisfied with each other. The birth of a daughter was a happiness, unexpected, and almost unreal. Therefore, Maria father unconditionally just adored, and Wendy even allowed herself to dream of grandchildren. Having successfully graduated from the law school of the local university, Maria began to work, changed several places. She took root, oddly enough, in a noisy and crowded real estate company, helping employees and clients in drawing up documents and guiding them through the authorities. Screening girls, young boys running through the office, were workmates, but nothing more. Maria was like something out of the last century. Big gray eyes, dark waves, hair, and a tall, slender figure. But the main thing, of course, was in her main movements and manner of holding herself, as if she had just stepped out of a picture of the life of counts and countesses. Hence the coldness and restraint of her kept her from coming too near. She was always on a first-name basis with people. At arm's length, the life of the family flowed peacefully and softly. Parents very quickly, one after another, departed into the next world. Very modest, inconspicuous people who carried their responsibilities all their lives as they should. And when they grew old, just as obediently and peacefully passed away one after another, as if they were tied. So Maria stayed with Pushkin and lived quietly, not suffering from the lack of relatives and friends. After all, there was a good friend from early childhood, and gave her their warmth and affection. Now she had a new relationship ahead of her. Maria ran to Adriana a day or two later. "Hello, Adriana. It's Maria. Can I come by again tonight?" she called before leaving her office. It was always like this. Rada treated her to tea from her meager stock. Maria, seeing the embarrassment of her new friend's position, brought her a little so as not to embarrass her. She was an excellent worker and earned quite well for her position. Deals were made a lot, despite the crises and cataclysms that abounded in the last 10 years, and a good lawyer. Both clients and realtors appreciated, but each time the guest was convinced not in the horse's fodder. Adriana ate like a bird, and most often she had no appetite at all. The only food she accepted with joy was food for her favorite cat. Here Maria did not skimp on the most premium. Oh, how timely just sprinkled her last Adriana's eyes lit up at the sight of a bag for Marquise. The woman immediately looked away in embarrassment, embarrassed by her poverty and not admitting to it. The Marquise should get used to me. Maybe she'll realize I'm not unhealthy and will accept food from me, Maria explained to her innkeeper, smiling at Adriana. She didn't want to embarrass the sick. "And where did you get such a gorgeous cat?" she inquired. Adriana smiled weakly. It was evident that the memory pleased her. "Oh, that's a very interesting story," she stretched out, "and funny and reddish, and at the same time she was silent." Recovering in her memory the details of that long-ago day, there was always music playing in our house. Parents were different. Sometimes they partied till they dropped. Sometimes my mom liked to cry, even cry, finding some far-fetched reasons. Mom had no reason to cry, I assure you, Maria. Daddy worshipped her, but Mommy was a real Carmen. You know, hot, passionate, and terribly, terribly jealous. And my parents loved to go to the theater and were regulars at Philharmonic concerts. And Dad had the misfortune to praise one of our local singers. She sang the main parts. She had a beautiful voice. Her name was Molly. Mom, of course, had to show her temper. She made a scene. It was only at home that my sister and I laughed. But Daddy wasn't laughing. It was Mom's way of asserting herself, you see. It may have looked silly from the outside, but Mommy knew what she was doing. Our intelligent, mild-mannered Daddy was also asserting his own importance. What about such a beautiful girl? His wife is jealous of him, and even to whom the prima donna of the opera stage. It means that he is worth it. That means he's a real man. My God, how touching they were in their funny quarrels. And how did they make up afterward? Dad would sneak in a huge bouquet. Mom was starting to play the role of the perfect hostess who never was and suffered solely on Dad's orders. Adriana's bloodless face became lively at the telling of the story. It was felt that she was oblivious and distracted from her painful condition. Memories of her loved ones gave her strength. Only breathing was difficult. The woman took breaks to take a break from her emotional narrative. And then Mom went quite far in her marital zeal, wanting to prove that she was ready to do anything for Dad. Suddenly, she herself offered to approach that singer and present her with a bouquet. Dad was confused, but he couldn't contradict Mom. You know, the husband's a tomboy. It's great for the family and the kids. After all, in the main, Daddy never conceded to anyone in the work in friendship. And in his love for Mom, he was faithful. He acted only according to his beliefs and principles. And here they are, Mom, with an important look, Dad with a gorgeous bouquet go after the performance in the restroom of the actress. And there's not a single admirer at the door. Not even the most pathetic bouquet under the door. The actress, in whose honor just exploded with applause. The hall sat in a corner, alone holding a cute little white kitty on her lap and wiping her tears. It turned out that the other day Molly leaves to her husband in Israel. Planned her benefit, but the wife of the chief director of mediocrity and envy of nice did not want Molly to receive a farewell ovation. She secretly warned all the servants of the theater, who simply frightened of dismissal, and the servants simply put the intended prima, bouquets, and baskets in the backyard. Not only that, intrigue, I hope, after the departure of Warshawskaya to get her role by intrigues, achieved the cancellation of the benefit actress, telling about it completely strangers to her people. Burst into tears on the shoulder of our mother. And the daughter. My God, how is she? How are you? Yes, you are a golden voice, my dear Mommy, hugged and sobbed with her. Daddy did not know how to calm this couple drowning in tears, but called someone from the closet and asked to bring champagne from the cupboard. When the parents came home at midnight, and the best friend of the singer's mother, Antu Warshawski, at her mother's arms, sat that same white kitty, and left her a living mascot. A new soulful friend, so we had Marquise. Mommy, with her inherent passion, was raring to fight, and this time was supported by both Daddy and us. She arranged a grandiose scandal in the theater, disgraced the mean wife of the editor-in-chief for the whole city. But it was too late. Molly didn't leave from the community window. We loved her so much. You see how she's become just a marquesa. Now she reminds us of three good people. Idea, who also recently passed away, and her parents. And this is why I love her so much and cherish Adriana. You could see it in her ever-changing breasts and that breathing. But her eyes were shining. A smile never left her lips. It was the first time I saw her so lively, almost cheerful, and I was glad of it. I can no longer provide her with the same care as before. Adriana repented. You see, Maria, it's empty. Well, I still have the strength to sell everything I had. I want to leave behind a vacant apartment so I don't have to go to the trouble of selling it. You have to face the truth. Are you a very strong person, Adriana? Said Maria, lowering her eyes. Very decent. That's the whole story of our family, said Adriana. The family is gone, and the story is over. Her pale lips even shifted slightly into the semblance of a smile. And my life will soon be over. I'd like to end it in a nice way, you know, but nothing comes to mind, and I don't have the strength, let alone the means. Edward wanted to leave Andrew some money. He was worried about the apartment being so empty. But my boy, well done, he didn't take it. He's too much of an honest, selfless man, like everyone else in the family. But I'm glad that at least my apartment will remain to my nephew. He will sell it anyway, to expand the housing in my town. It's probably the least I can do to thank him. A pure soul. How does he take care of me? He's been the only one who's kept me going these last few years. Isn't he going to move in with you? I asked Maria. He's still working after graduation. And to live with a sick aunt is not the greatest happiness. I'm even glad he won't have time to do it. The stuff and the apartment is all that. That's not the main thing. But I was so scared about Marcus. I love her more than anything in the world. She's a cat, the only creature dear to me. Marquise has been with me all through my illness. Can you imagine? She comforted me, laid next to me on my sore spot after chemo, and when I was literally turned inside out, guarded me by the bathroom door, only calmed down when I crawled out of there powerless and delirious to the point of bed. And the hospital was waiting for me. Now I will be calm for my beautiful girl. You will certainly not offend her." The cat looked attentively at the two women and calmly lay in its usual place, as if it fully understood their conversation and sympathized with them. It smelled cozy and warm. Maria began to approach the cat more and more often, who was already allowing the stranger to pet herself. When people have little time to socialize and all the deadlines are shortened, they get closer much faster than in normal life. Adriana was in a hurry. She wanted to talk about her own. The young girl turned out to be a soulful and attentive listener. Gradually, she got to know Adriana's story completely. Young Adriana came to the city to study. She lived with her older sister and brother-in-law, who were already well settled here, working and raising a sweet son. Adriana adored her nephew's baby, and he reciprocated. But what can be said? But to sit on each other's heads in a small apartment of young spouses, and even with a small child, was shameful. 6 months later, Adriana moved into a student dormitory. "Why are you leaving?" Her sister resented her. "Anna is as thin and white as Adriana. I have hot soup at home anytime. There's a balcony for you. Please, Jacob, you tell her." She addressed her husband, who was as young as she was. He was totally immersed in his favorite job. Not much at home, of course. Technical high school teacher, not even a school teacher. He was required to immerse himself in 2 areas at once: educating children and organizing scientific work and practice with them. Jacob came tired and did not really get involved in domestic affairs, but the recovery of the body needed, and he in good conscience, admittedly, would be happy to more often visit his favorite wife in the marital bed. And secretly, he was also waiting for his student to move in. It's a young business. Stay. Hold the young husband, but not too convincingly. She did, and I didn't regret it at all. Whoever hasn't lived in such a town is not a student. A girl from the provinces had an easy disposition. She excelled in her studies. But most of all, she was attracted to the section of tourism, in which there were many strong and as cheerful as herself. Boys and girls, especially guys. One of them caught her eye. Tall, a head taller than Adriana herself, mighty blonde. The name Edward seemed strange, but it didn't fit a regular guy with big hands and obviously familiar with a shovel paddle, or even a hunting rifle. And he's like a normal student in general. Quietly questioned Adriana his classmates, as everyone answered her. In his studies, of course, he was diligent and hardworking, but sometimes he would give away an idea. Last week, I offered to replace one tricky thing in the cleaning on the machine, and it worked like a charm. Imagine, even our professor was surprised he didn't think of it himself. And really this one, as he was called by his friends, gave out a proposal, which was so eager to try and practice. Technical University. But even here, such bright heads are not often found. And in the student trial gathered a core of the same thorough, thoughtful guys. No one was surprised when later they stayed together and set up the production of household appliances. During camping trips, it was often Adriana who found herself next to him. Or maybe she was the one who inadvertently fell into his arms. He was so big and handsome. He seemed strong and dependable. In fact, he was. No, he wasn't. The tough guy would stop the newcomer and go to fix a peg for the tent. And that's how he tried it. Took a knife from his buddy and showed him how to pinch small chips and dry wood to quickly start a fire. And when he ruled a sprain with one sharp movement, on the mountain trail along the very line, he became almost a god to her. She had stayed up all night, grateful, remembering the warmth of his hands on her ankle and reimagining his hair in front of her. Her leg ached, but she could still make out his curls. It must be true what they say about the rescue becoming special to the one who saved him. And so it was with Adriana. He was now taking her everywhere. He could call out to her from afar. "The hard route ran over your leg today. You hear that? Well, it's axe porridge today." He teased her when it was her turn to make porridge. So gradually, imperceptibly, he became closer and closer. She sang and couldn't believe her happiness. However, she did not give any sign by the end of the hike. The comrades, who noticed their not quite usual affection for each other, began to shout them both these jars. It was exactly affection, because they walked together as if attached to each other. and the two bright heads were always glimpsing each other. When will you call me to the wedding? The sacramental question was finally asked at the end of the hike. Oh, really? What wedding? Adriana blushed. Here, lie down, order a cafe, and we'll call you there. Edward joked. There was no wedding. What kind of wedding for students? But we went to the registry office. They drank champagne to the guitar, sang, and had fun. Soon, Edward graduated from the institute, and a year later, Adriana and Edward defended themselves, got their diplomas, rented a place to live, and started a modest, as in student life. Instead of a couple at the institute, they worked in their cooperative, as it was then customary to call a private enterprise, no matter how big or small. Edward turned out to be not such a strong technical genius, as it seemed in his student days. But he got to know such good fellows who could do incredible things in a couple of days. His decency and responsibility impressed almost everyone who was acquainted with him. And when he made his case for cooperation, many of that old guard willingly went. Their time had come precisely at the moment when industrial production was being destroyed in the country. The adventurism of youth, bringing friends together. An idea. The gusto and fervor were not yet wasted. The forces moved them. How brave are young people who do not assume failure and Oblomov. This ignorance allows them to act without regard to authority. Listen, old man, we're solving a question. You should run up. No one can solve it but you understand? It's a matter of honor, old man. And the old man drove, walked, called back. Even though Edward never promised him anything, never lured him in, he was just a man of action. Talents flocked like butterflies to the light. They all wanted to do the real thing, to break a sweat. They wanted to give it their all, they wanted it to be interesting. So that steam would come out of your ears, and then a sigh of relief would burst out of your chest. We found it. We did it. Ed said. What did you do to lure me in, tell me? I mean, he's a talent. He'll win the Nobel Prize if he puts his inventions together and shows them off. And you keep him in a chicken coop where he can't breathe. I'm not thinking, I'm thinking. You don't understand anything about sausage trimmings, Googled Ed, grabbing his little wife by the shoulders and putting her in front of him. He didn't come to the office. He's come to us, understand? Well, how do you want it? And people shouldn't be working under these conditions. Adriana spoke. Let's calculate how much we need for new windows. Furniture again to renew. Well, these computers are state-of-the-art. They're standing on shabby, almost dumpy desks. Come on, I'll order them tomorrow. Sign right here. That's scratching my thick hair. Signing sometimes with elephants. What's a dump? Adriana, for God's sake. Your son-in-law took them from the school desks. At least don't say that to him. My sister's husband really did spend years directing the floor at a vocational college, and on an acquaintance helped and written off from the risky desks of his. How to resist the kindred charm? The two families lived amicably, meeting at the dinner table on holidays. But not so long ago, Anna and Jacob moved to a neighboring town, where their son studied at the institute. Adriana, although she was not in the specialty of the accounting center, from the first days was engaged in the payroll of employees and other small matters, to which Edward did not reach hands. A woman's eye sees the world differently, and sometimes the wife could notice Edward's nose and his shortcomings, which he marveled at. Wow, I wouldn't have realized. The years went by, then flew by, and they were the same amorous little panic, head to head, solving life's problems on vacation. The spouses would go hiking for old memories, mastering the most difficult routes. One day, they had to interrupt the hike at the most unexpected moment. The son-in-law had a heart attack. He died overnight. My nephew was only in his first year of study, no comrades, no life experience. The sister in the new town had no time to recognize anyone. In addition, in the terrible grief of confusion, the funeral chores fell on Edward's shoulders. Adriana comforted her sister as best she could. You want us to take you back. We'll find you a comfortable apartment. You'll get a job. There's always a part-time job at Edward's office. You'll be fine, Anna. I can't go back there. Don't you understand? I was in tears. Anna, every time I see you, my heart bleeds for the good times we had. Why did you ever think of moving? He could have worked at his college. Quietly. No, he's got to go into manufacturing. These plans are stressful. And Anna cried again and reread, unable to talk about anything else. Edward had gone home. Business was not waiting. Adriana stayed behind to help her sister and support her, at least for the first time. She was well aware that Jacob had no chance of survival. That was what the doctors had explained after the autopsy. It was such a case that a heart defect does not manifest itself in any way during a person's lifetime. And it is impossible to be saved from its manifestation without knowing about it in advance. Anna, however, did not want to hear this. She fixated on unbelievable options to save her husband and blamed herself. She took almost all her sister's worries upon herself and held awake for 9 days as she remained indifferent. Why was Anna saying all this? Would it bring Jasoba back? I started crying again. It was also impossible to sort out the dead man's personal belongings in front of her. She would just get hysterical. Adriana and Andrew tried to deal with this burdensome matter as quickly as possible. When did Anna go to the cemetery? She went to Jacob's grave every day and came back in tears. Neither her son nor her sister could resist. How can you keep a man from love? A trifle to the dead. No matter how much I try to help, but everyone must survive the death of a loved one himself. Adriana had work waiting for her. Edward could use the support and care of his wife. And here Anna must come out of her depression in time, and the absence of her sister will only be to her benefit. Otherwise, she will live in her fragile shell of grief, not taking in any worries from Othello's determination and concern for the student's son. If Andrew does not break through this wall between mother and everyday life, then no one else will. That was what Adriana assumed. With a heavy heart, she left her 2 loved ones. But now lonely people, long conversations, and doing things together with her nephew had brought them even closer together. And now Adriana made daily calls not only to her sister, but also to Andrew. "Oh, Aunt Adriana," Andrew lamented. "Mom is unrecognizable. She's turning into an old lady. Now she's started going to church. Can you imagine? Praying, baptizing. She even smells like someone else's heavy odor. I don't know what to do." They say that daughters often repeat the fate of their sister's mother, Adriana. Anna exactly repeated the death of her husband, drove her into such depression that the woman began to melt before her eyes. The son did not know how to make his mother enjoy life. Moving mother became lethargic, without initiative. Everything was falling out of her hands. Constant gloomy mood and helplessness possessed her. So the weeks dragged on for months. At first, Anna hardly went to work. It distracted her a little and kept her going. But one day came when she simply did not get up in the morning. The doctor, who was called by her exhausted son, gave a referral for tests. But in the morning, the mother lay listless and didn't want to get up. Andrew called his aunt and son-in-law. Immediately, the relatives arrived and were amazed at how much Anna had given up. She was almost an old woman with a faded look, dressed in anything. She spent most of her time in silence, sitting somewhere and looking at herself. Shocked, the couple decided that they would come every weekend, wasting their energy and money on a short trip. As soon as the work week was over, Adriana and Edward drove to Anna's house, taking her out to a restaurant in the countryside. Her sister even began to smile when she remembered the childish pranks or words of little Andrew. But no matter what her loved ones did for her, then Anna returned again and again to her once again private state. Soon things got even worse. Anna began to fall down on the spot. "Son, I can't see anything." With horror, she said to Andrew when he came back from class and hurriedly prepared lunch, "Would you at least read me what is written in the newspapers?" But then Veda was forgotten again and sat aloof in thoughts unknown to the boy. In the meantime, her son was doing his best, growing older and stronger, calling the line, and in an almost rapturous voice his aunt said, "I got a part-time job in a restaurant as a waiter. Sometimes I get tips. I'd really like to continue. Thank you, Uncle Edward, for your help, of course. But I like to have more fun. I'm not the only one here. There's more of us." Andrew's voice sounded cheerful, and he didn't want to object. Let the boy husband decided to marry the money that Edward sent. Of course, enough. But Andrew was a man. He dreamed of independence. Turns out he was too early for that. Soon the part-time jobs were gone. His mother's health required his constant attention. It was clear that it was not depression. Soon Anna was admitted to the hospital. A terrible thing was revealed. They found a tumor in the brain, which was pressing on the optic nerves. The disease progressed so quickly that there was no point in surgery. Within 2 months, Anna was literally burnt out. It was not clear whether it was because of the disease that she became depressed or because of her worries after the death of her husband. The tumor developed so quickly. Andrew was left without a father and mother, and it was necessary to finish his studies. Andrew told him, "Edward, study hard, don't think about bad things. You can't get your parents back. You have a life to live, and you must live successfully and happily," Adriana added. "Yes, I must. Happily," Edward confirmed seriously. "Don't worry about money. We'll also send you the amount you need. Finish your studies. Welcome to our company. In the meantime, all weekends and vacations are waiting for you. And once again, we'll be traveling with sad worries. Again, the packing up of the closest person. Memorial tables, candles." Adriana found it very difficult. Even more painful for Andrew. Without a family, her favorite boy, so kind, so tenacious, so diligent. "Andrew, it's okay. You know, when kids bury their parents. It's when parents have to lose their kids. That's terrible. So take it for what it's worth. Well, some people have to do it sooner. Some people have to do it later." She kissed him on the top of his head, tilted his fair head toward her, and tried not to cry. If only he had a girl, it wouldn't be so depressing to leave. But no, he'd given himself to taking care of his mother. He had no time for relationships. "Yes, I understand. Aunt Adriana, I'm fine." Andrew calmed her down and hid his eyes too. Now they understood a lot about their mother's and sister's behavior, but there was nothing they could do. Adriana tried as much as possible to give her nephew the warmth he received from his mother. How unfortunate it was for the nephew. The couple had to go to their home. They could not live because of the young man. They could not talk in the evenings about anything but Anna's death. Maybe it was a fatal mistake. Adriana wondered aloud. Maybe Anna should have gone back. At least here, we're already settled, both people and town. Adriana will take her death anyway. Edward said sadly, "You realize that, don't you? She'll wait until you're in the fall. She will deceive, but she will steal the one who must die on this day at this hour. You can explain it however you want." Yes, Adriana understood. She thought again of her mother, who couldn't get over her husband's death. Her parents were not a quiet, friendly couple. Their relationship was reminiscent of Italian movies. The jealous mom was always suspicious of her father, calling back to work if he was running late. The father was patient and silent for a long time, then he exploded. The girls, Anna and Adriana, would cover their ears. Then the parents, as if nothing had happened, decided to go to the theater, to visit or to a banquet, quickly packed up and left for the south, entrusting their daughters with an independent existence. The girls laughed at their parents' eccentricities, because they knew how they adore each other's first words when Dad returned from work were, "Where's Mom? Is she home?" Mother, taking off her shoes in the hallway, already asked, "Where's Daddy already come?" And when the father fell under the car drunk, slack-jawed, the mother barely lived without him for a year, then quietly died in her sleep, not giving trouble to her daughters. It seems that with the death of her husband, she completely lost the source of life, did not raise her voice, did not show any passion, and was a smooth, boring aunt. And she hadn't even retired yet. If Anna didn't have Adriana and Adriana didn't have Anna, it's hard to imagine how they would have borne the loss of their parents. Everyone. Sisterly attachment is stronger than the closest friendship. After all, sisters have known each other all their lives, ever since the youngest of them was born. And now Adriana's nephew, Andrew, was second only to her husband. Adriana herself was not given a child by God. In their youth, the couple did not suffer about it at all. They had enough of each other's company. They were never bored. So many interesting things around, so many topics for conversation and discussion. The most interesting thing was that they were together or near each other day and night. But never did Adriana have the urge to move away from her husband of what is called long-married ladies to take a break from him. Apparently, Edward felt the same way. "You're not bored with me?" Adriana asked him. "You've got such smart men in your office. I'm not much good." "You have such smart men in your office." Edward laughed. "And I'm not so good here either." He would approach her with rags, blonde hair, and say, "How much paint waste at other wives to paint gray hair, and we save money. And the main thing is that it's forever. Where will we spend the savings?" The wife was picking up on it. "Come on, Andrew, let's buy something fashionable. Let the girls hang on him." "Let them." Edward waved his hand. "Remember, I had sneakers and fancy jeans. If it hadn't been for those clothes, you wouldn't have interfered with me." And they kept teasing each other and goofing off. It was like it hadn't been years since they'd been romantically in love. Life is just as beautiful despite the time. Sunshine, green trees, mountains if you drive a bit in the right direction. When Adriana decided to take her women's health seriously and try her luck. On her birthday, it turned out it was too late for her to worry about it. Perhaps some hereditary reason had played a role. Or maybe the long-distance hikes had produced such a result that children were no longer possible. "All right," Edward waved his hand. When she told him about the unfortunate doctor's visit. Not everyone has to be a parent, and not everyone can have one after all. Andrew was being sly. Maybe he just wanted to reassure his wife so she wouldn't have an inferiority complex. Later, Adriana would conjure up this moment many times. But how do you know how the husband really felt? And what good would it do? You can't get back what you've lost. They've traveled to so many countries. It's easier to travel comfortably now, and they still go camping. Like 15 years ago. This summer, Andrew went on an internship. "We'll take advantage of the moment." Suggested to his wife, Edward, "Wherever we've been. Let's go mountain hiking. Look at the route." "Oh, that's a whole new direction." "It's my dream." Adriana was excited. Light, slim, like a girl. She was pretty and still young-looking. Her health had never let her down until then. But this summer, Lena had a hard time going on a hike. Already on the train, she felt short of air. As she stepped onto the platform, her heart clenched. "You look pale." Edward was worried. "Woman's Day. I don't think so. I'm just being simple-minded." I hastened to refute his suspicions. "Adriana, it'll pass in the air." "What's the air like here?" And she put her face to the fresh breeze. The climb up the mountain again brought her difficulty in breathing, and she felt dizzy and dizzy again. It seemed to have passed only a little, but she was already powerless and sat down right on the path on a large boulder. "Let's go down," Edward said sharply. He helped his wife up and dragged her down. The descent took a long time. The couple stopped from time to time so that Adriana could rest. At the bottom, she was put to bed. But her strength recovered too slowly. The injections given by the paramedic on duty did not help. Adriana and Edward were driven to the nearest hospital by random hitchhikers in a large Jeep. Other cars would hardly have been able to travel that way, or rather off-road. Edward spent the night in a chair in the hospital corridor. In the morning, he could hardly wait for the doctor to examine his wife. Alas, the doctor said, "Your wife has something more serious than fatigue or malaise, by the looks of it. I believe a CT scan is required. We don't even have a decent X-ray machine." The elderly doctor sighed and thought about it. "You know what? We'll keep her here for now. We'll help the body gather strength, and you contact a serious medical institution. Then you'll know exactly where you're going, and your wife's trip will be easier. For now, I'd recommend she rest." The frustrated Edward shook the doctor's hand and went to call his relatives, which meant he had almost no time left to look for friends who could help. Calling on all reserves and resources, Edward drove his wife to the regional center and put her in a good clinic. Friends helped. The neuro specialists suspected the same thing from all the symptoms. It was cancer, a death that creeps up and gnaws into the body stealthily, sneakily. After setting aside the time necessary for the examination, Adriana returned home, even though her sister had died of cancer. She so didn't want to believe the damned diagnosis. How could it be? She asked her husband a question for which there was no answer. "I didn't drink, I didn't smoke. I'm perfectly happy in my personal life. I'm doing well at work. It's written that this disease comes from stress and worry. She was sitting down. Sister Anna also thought she was a happy woman. But it happened as it happened. Lenotchka, don't worry. Edward took her hand. Medicine doesn't stand still. As long as you heal, your body will fight. In the meantime, scientists will come up with a way to finally defeat the disease. We'll fight to the bitter end. We'll beat it. Adriana believed in her husband, otherwise there was no other way to live. He had always been her rock. And now she too felt that she was not alone in the face of the disease. Edward had never given her a reason not to trust him. He had never once in his life failed her in major matters and issues. All decisions were made together in concert, so she threw herself into the fight of her life, drank all possible medicines, used folk remedies, in time to lie down for routine treatment in the hospital. At the same time, she tried to stay awake, to look after herself. In front of my eyes stood the image of a sick sister with faded eyes, waving her hand and eerily indifferent to her appearance. Adriana loved her husband and wanted to remain for him as desirable and sweet as she had always been. She believed that together they would conquer the disease. Edward was touchingly patient, with her dragging through the hard and dark days. When the disease worsened, weeks of remission came quickly as she took walks, watched movies, read books. Every minute she felt her husband's care unfailing and not intrusive. And then there was always her beloved Marquise nearby. She felt the mistress as no one else fluffy friend did not remember the evil, because the owners always left her alone in the cat cattery when they left on a trip or went on a camping trip. But the cat forgave it to people because she was attached to them, and she had already developed an addiction to this mode of existence. She lay down at her mistress's side, rearranged herself on the sore spot, and Callous' soothing purr stroked the fluffy fur at Marquise's side. Adriana was making plans, and that's when she recovered. Thus began her next dreamy evening with Edward. Of course, it wasn't easy for her husband. He had to keep up with work, communicate with the attending Raspberry, doctors, organize appointments for the procedure at home, and cooking, cleaning. I mean, he had to take care of that too. Adriana was helpless at times, and when a little withdrawn, she felt so disgusted with earthly affairs that she wanted to turn to the wall and not see anyone. And again, her favorite Marquise came to her aid. Perhaps those who regard their presence in the house as a healer are right. In any case, on Adriana's soft smile of her cozy creature acted exactly healing. Well, or as happened more and more often, at least soothing. It wasn't like it had been at the beginning of her illness now, when Adriana had dashed to work on good days. What about my boys again? Everything must have smelled like tobacco smoke. And Hope's not mopping the floors well again. I gotta keep an eye on her. It's always a mess in the bathroom. Calm down. My husband laughed. We have no irreplaceable, but immediately faltered under her gaze and coped. But there are unique ones. This is our Adriana. Jenna, your assistant won't do everything, of course. Like you, she's still a little inexperienced, but she's doing fine. So don't worry, rest and regain your strength. I just bought you some vitamins. And he immediately went to the kitchen, called a bunch of rings, and so switched Adriana's attention to some special overseas fruits. Then, seating her in a corner not far from him, he would prepare dinner. He understood how dreary it was for a sick person to be home alone all day without much to do, and often still suffering from nausea and pain. So the first thing he did was to make sure they were in the same room and close to each other in the evenings. Adriana's assistant had been cooking for a long time. It was a young woman, Jenna, from the neighborhood, a widow with a small child. The child was what made her needy, and at the same time could not work full-time, only studied. Formed her part-time, and soon Adriana became convinced that Jenna was diligent in getting into details. She began to trust her with more and more important work. Truth be told, she didn't like it very much. Jenna's manner of talking and loud, annoying laughter. Well, what can you do? It's the new generation. They are so well-mannered and have no complexes, which is also considered to work well and not bad. And still at first Adriana was not worried about her place. No, about the job. Exactly for how they will manage without her, But after all, Edward is well aware of the situation in the office. He reassured her, "You taught yourself the light. And you know very well she's a smart girl. She's trying. So it's all right. We've got a paycheck and a comfortable workplace. You'd think, what else is there?" But recovery didn't come. Periods of good health became less frequent. And in short, the exacerbation of the disease became more frequent and prolonged. Adriana didn't sleep well at night, and from the very beginning of her illness, and asked to be left alone in bed. Her husband moved into the next room without complaint for the night, leaving the door open to hear her if she needed anything. Then the need arose for him to work on some paperwork. When Adriana was well, he was sometimes able to stay late in the workroom. Adriana could walk home alone or go to a cafe with a friend, waiting for him to return for a late dinner. And now he secluded himself in his room. So little by little, the couple began to drift apart. The evenings became quiet. Conversations faded away. What was there to discuss if they didn't go anywhere together, saw nothing, talked to no one? 5 whole years passed in such an environment. A saint would not have been able to endure so long around a sick man. Edward, on the other hand, behaved as always, continued to care for his wife, and was unfailingly even-tempered. Preoccupied with her pain, Adriana never reflected on her husband's behavior, believing it to be as it should be. She took his labors for granted. Sick people are so often selfishly blind to other people's problems. Increasingly, she had to resort to sleeping pills and painkillers. Edward had long ago also handled these himself skillfully, like a professional nurse. Adriana had loved his big, warm hands since her long-ago camping trips. They were the skillful, strong hands of a master of the slain man. Yet the strength in them was special, gentle. Or maybe it seemed that way to Adriana. Today, he was administering her anesthetic. After the injection, the patient lay quietly, turned away as always to the wall, covering her eyelids, listening to what was happening outside. At this time, in the kitchen, where her husband was clearing the table after dinner, his cell phone rang. Edward, in a muffled voice, started the conversation. It became clear who he was talking to: the woman who had come into the company for her Adriana seat. When had she gotten sick? The specifics of the job were so well known to the line that she could guess Edward's interlocutor by 2 or 3 phrases. Yes, this is Jenna, of course, a business conversation. But suddenly his intonation changed, became stealing. Some kind of intimate, barely knowing line. "Well, something sweet," said Edward, muffled by his beautiful baritone. "Everything will be fine. Just a little bit. Be patient tonight." "Of course not. No, I can't. She's asleep for now. But she'll wake up soon." "What are you doing?" I almost shrieked. Edward immediately lowered his voice almost to a whisper. "I'll see you tomorrow morning." Kisses. Adriana couldn't understand what this conversation meant. But everything is clear and understandable. Her husband, and it is an uninspired young relationship. But does it happen like that? How is it possible? This is her husband's own, the only one, the first and the last. He's caring and attentive. It's perfect. Adriana didn't bat an eye herself. Her temples pounded. Caring, attentive. Perfect pretended to be asleep until her husband retired to his room for the night. Then she gathered her strength with great exertion, trying not to make noise, dragged from the mezzanine suitcase, with which once in the happy days of the 2 of them went to Europe. Her husband was breathing evenly and quietly in the next bedroom. She knew his habit, just put his head on the pillow. He sleeps like a dead man. Already calmer, she gathered his things and neatly stacked the suitcases on the in advance took to the kitchen. An empty one for now. I knew that a full one wouldn't lift him, and I couldn't carry it. Looked around once more the closet shelves. But I think I've packed all the essentials. Till Dawn sat in the chair, either in oblivion or in half-drama. But I had no strength to think about what was happening. Granson crouched, faithful Marquise. Here it was morning. Heard Edward got up and went to the toilet. Then Adriana rose from her seat and went to the kitchen. She poured water into the kettle and lit the gas burner. "You will not drink tea today," she said as if to herself, but she addressed it to her husband. He had just entered the kitchen, wiping his face and neck with a snow-white towel. Good morning. How did she sleep? Why are you up so early? He reached out to kiss her, but Adriana pulled away, and he almost tripped over a suitcase. What's this? And immediately his face began to lose its features before Adriana's eyes. It was very frightening to see. There was one man standing in front of her, and half a minute later another, completely lost. Disintegrated. A stranger. He understood everything. Go away, Adriana said calmly. I heard your conversation. There's a child in there, he said, after a silence. The son is 3 years old. Forgive me, I couldn't tell you. It would have been too cruel. Did you hope I would die and not find out? Adriana asked in a strange voice. I'm sorry, there's no way I can die. Would you have gotten married then? Go away. Edward silently took his suitcase and left. Adriana looked at him and wondered how this dearly loved man was now suddenly a stranger. How could it be? Could it be that she was in some kind of suspended state? Couldn't help crying and cursing her lovers. She froze and then went to the window, then sat in the chair, mindlessly looking in front of herself. To realize what had happened could not. A day later, I went to the hospital in a very bad condition. Were you under some kind of stress? The doctor asked, a pretty, dry woman a little younger than Adriana herself. Not really. Faintly, Adriana answered, although it was clear from her voice that yes, of course it had been. This time the treatment was very hard and slow. The ambulance was called by a neighbor to take Marcus to the usual place. There was no one. Worried about the cat, which for the first time was left without care and supervision, she called her nephew. Andrew, try to come. Please. I'm begging you, honey. The cat's all alone in there. I didn't have time to warn anyone. Adriana herself did not understand why now. After so many days of loneliness and patience, large tears rolled down her cheeks. Before, she had been like a dried-up pond with cracks at the bottom of her dark, soulless, dried-up neck. Andrew was upset that the aunt was in the hospital again, and promised to come back soon. He was quite satisfied with the stated business trip. When he asked in surprise where Edward was, his nephew had indeed arrived. He was to not only take care of his aunt, but also to become an operative, to listen to Adriana's heavy account of what had happened. Aunt Adriana, he said, hugging the slimmed down. Woman, you are strong. Do you remember how you took care of Mom? How you explained everything well to her? I can't do that. But you realize you have to live. And your uncle? But let him live once. He can do that. You're right. Adriana supported him warmly. Let him live. How much he's taken care of me. I should be grateful to him. Really, Andrew? She peered inquisitively into the young man's eyes, but he averted his gaze. What could he say? How could he? Answers for a strong adult. Everyone makes his own choices. From that day on, the boy helped his aunt in any way he could. He came to her every time she called. He took care of all the cases that required walking to all sorts of authorities. He was the one who talked to the doctors and delivered the medicine. It was good that he was well regarded by his superiors at his workplace, where he worked for the 2nd year after graduating from the institute. Realizing the need to travel, they let him go, gave him time off. Once Andrew came to bring his aunt from the hospital, he decided to clean up so that the apartment was at least clean. He booed the symbol of the floor. When the doorbell rang, Edward stood on the doorstep. Hello, Andrew, gloomy. He said hello without expressing surprise. Hi. Andrew was a little confused. Don't you have a key? I do. Why not? Edward took a bunch of keys out of his pocket. It's just inconvenient. I wanted to return it to the line. Come on in. Andrew moved aside, clearing the passage. Here are my floors. Aunt Lena's being discharged tomorrow. I thought I'd freshen the air, so to speak. Edward held himself as stiffly as a guest. It was obvious he was uncomfortable. The conversation wasn't going well. Meanwhile, Andrew put a kettle on the table, put cookies, butter, and tea on the table. Having poured it into cups, he moved the guest and made an inviting gesture. Come on, let's drink tea. All his movements were practiced. Taking care of his mother had given him the skills of housekeeping. The boy got it. Thought he was still on the prowl himself. And here I am." The boy looked at him uncomprehendingly, but his gaze was so bright and guileless that Edward didn't realize how he'd spoken about it. "You may judge me, of course," he began. "Yes, I am a traitor. Adriana is my only love, but it just so happens that this woman—" He hesitated, but he didn't call the light by name. "Turned out to be pregnant. A chance encounter, fleeting. But she wouldn't let me rest. You see, she wouldn't say a word, but she kept looking at me like that. And I was tired. I got weak. It just happened." Andrew listened silently, keeping his eyes open as Edward sighed heavily and clutched his head with both hands resting on his knees. "And then my son was born, and that was it. I couldn't leave them. It's 3 years now." They sat in silence. Then Andrew said, "Uncle, I'm not your judge. You've always helped me. But I know one thing for sure, Aunt Adriana would never have left you. 5-10 years of her whole life she would have been with you." "I know," Edward almost whispered. "I know. That's why I don't apologize. It's hard." Rising from his chair, he put the keys to the tea beside the cup without touching it. Maria listened to Adriana and realized that she didn't want to remain so lonely by her old age. She already wanted to leave this empty apartment, to start living in a different way, to be light at heart, light in the house. She sympathized with Adriana with all her heart and was ready to help her. And so the day came before the trip to the hospital. Adriana had warned her in advance, and Maria came in the evening with the clear intention of taking the cat home with her. Adriana had also prepared in advance. Maria. Marquise got used to her a long time ago. And here is the rest of the food. True, I haven't been out lately, so it's not much, but I think it's enough for a couple of days. And these are the essentials. These are our Marquise's favorite toys. She put a ball, a rubber mouse, and a couple of other things next to it. The woman says a long goodbye to her pet. She whispers softly in her ear. Only she can hear the words. Then she let her go, and Marquise silently climbed into the carrier. "Well, then we're off," Maria said. Finally, taking the bag of belongings in one hand and the other, she walked toward the exit. "Goodbye, Adriana. Have a good day. I'll be sure to call you." Adriana nodded and turned back to the window, holding back tears. Outside the window, a cold autumn rain was falling in unison with her mood. While Maria was carrying Marquise home, she was soaking wet. Wait. The bus in the rain wasn't very pleasant either, so she decided to do the easier thing. She walked. It was warm and cozy to dry in her apartment anyway. Letting the cat out of the carrier, she said, "Welcome to the new home of Marcus. Now you will be a mistress here to keep order, catch mice. Remember the main thing to remember." Caressing the cat affectionately, she lowered it to the floor and went about her business. She hung up her wet coat and scarf and put her shoes on to dry. Marquise sat by her things at first, then slowly she began to settle in. She walked around her new home for a long time, looking in all the corners. She did it all in silence. She slept on her own bed, which she had given to Adriana, and from then on she slept only on it. In the morning she went to work. Maria poured her food, poured water, and punished Marcus. "You stay for the mistress." Agreed. "If anything, my dear, not to me, all by." And left. The new resident got used to the apartment and the mistress not immediately. Maria didn't know how the Marquise behaved during the day alone in empty rooms. She would go to her office, return early in the morning and in the evening. Always worried. How was Marquise without her? Does not yearn for the former dwelling on his native mistress, worried about the health of the cat. But coming in the evening, she made sure that she had eaten a little, but enough not to starve and lose weight. She sighed. Then cleaned the litter box and took the white Marcus in her arms. "You're my good sweetheart. I know this is hard for you. You're like a flower that's been transplanted into different soil. Mommy didn't betray you, you know that. That's just the way it is. And I'll take care of you. Don't be sad, my good ones. We'll be friends." "Okay." The cat listened and was silent. She hadn't raised her voice once since she'd moved into Maria's apartment. It was strange, confusing, and scary. Maria was worried. Then she decided to calm down and wait. Since the cat was healthy, she didn't show any signs of anxiety. "Why are you so quiet?" I asked. She strokes the soft fur. That's the kind of marquesa you eat. I promise you will visit your mommy marquesa. You just don't get upset. Maria called Adriana several times at the hospital, then sent pictures of Marquise. The woman was very grateful to her, but her voice grew quieter and quieter each time. Several months passed, and then one day close to spring, Maria's call was not answered, nor the next day. Then a man answered the phone. "Hello. Are you calling Aunt Adriana? She's in the hospital. This is her nephew, Andrew." Maria almost shrieked. "This is Maria, a friend of hers. I know she's in the hospital. She's not well." "Hello, Maria. Auntie's gotten worse. She's been unconscious for 2 days." Andrew's voice sounded depressed. "And you've come for a long time. Will you be by her side?" Maria shuffled from foot to foot excitedly and suddenly had a very strong desire to help Adriana. "I took a vacation. Auntie has no one but me," Andrew explained. How could he know that Maria knew about this detail of Adriana's biography? And Maria made up her mind. "Andrew, will you let me visit her? Let's get something for the doctors to let me into the room. It's not like I'm a relative, and I need to see her, reassure her." "Well, let's try a little," confused from such pressure Andrew. The girl realized that arguments are necessary. "You see, I have a cat, Adriana Marquesa. I would like to calm her down, tell her about the cat, explain that everything is all right. Maybe it would make her feel better." "Oh, that's what this is about." Andrew was pleased. "You're the girl with the beautiful eyes and the kind heart. I got a reply. She told me about you. Come tomorrow between 2 and 5. I'll tell her you're my fiancé." Maria was embarrassed and confused at the same time. She hadn't expected such compliments, so she could only say, "Thank you until tomorrow." At night, the girl woke up from the fact that in her head from somewhere a vivid picture appeared in a bright room. She held in her hands a Snow White and a cat, as if the picture had formed. Yes, she must pass to Adriana with the Marcus drive to the hospital. With the cat in the bag was easy. And at the hospital itself, Maria chickened out. She did her best, as visibly as possible, to blink past the grenadier-looking janitor who sat on the passageway to the stairs leading to the rooms for the bedridden. But she was alert, even though there were plenty of visitors. She snatched Maria with a glance and shouted, because apparently she could not speak quietly. "And you, my dear, where are you going?" "To room 202. Maria got agitated again. Thank God, Andrew took care of the pass and called her in advance, warning her that there and there you can get it in hand. Otherwise, the janitor will not let you through. The groom grinned Maria to herself. The Marquise had not failed in the slightest, unaware of the zoo in her bag. The janitor nodded, and Maria began to ascend to the right floor. Here was the lower ward. Quietly opening the door, Maria prepared to see Adriana's dead face. For that reason alone, reality was not listening to her. Adriana lay with her eyes closed. Her mouth was outlined by a thin line of bloodless lips, her breathing almost imperceptibly moving the sheet on her chest. Had there been other patients in the ward, Maria would hardly have been able to recognize the mistress of the Marquesa at once. Thus she had changed before. Thin and pale now, Adriana's face had quite lost its individual features and had become as if a symbol on Brodsky of the human face. A dream, Maria thought. This is my dream. In the ward, and so completely painted white, was even lighter from the sun, and snow outside the window reigned here impersonal, without life nobility, frightening with its perfect network. She had to get used to it first. Maria stood at the door for a moment, then slowly approached the bed. The sick woman carefully took the cat out of her bag, which had not surrendered a sound so far, and carefully placed it on Adriana's bed. The Marquise did not look back at the foreign walls. Immediately she lay down next to her mistress and began licking her hands. Maria was amazed at this instant foundation. "My God!" She whispered in reverential horror, the Marquise, and recognized her. And then the cat screamed. These sounds could not be called a horse. It was a wild one. Never had Marina heard a cry before either. As if the animal was tormented by terrible pains. Marquise was saying goodbye to her mistress in horror at these heart-rending moans of Marquise. Maria grabbed the cat tightly in an armful and rushed out of the room, then back down the corridor, down the stairs to the exit. Leaving behind her bewilderment, turmoil, and terror, she could no longer see the orderlies and nurses scrambling to the patient's room to see if she could get around on her own. To find the source of the terrible howl, paralyzed and instilled with animal terror. But what became known to her for certain was that Adriana had stopped breathing that very night. Very soon after their Marquesa and hasty escape from the hospital, and Maria, finally certain that it was absolutely right to give the opportunity to say goodbye to two loving each other's souls, human and feline. Then there was the funeral. There were only a small handful of attendants at the funeral ceremony, consisting of neighbors and a few of Worshipful's former co-workers. A young man in his 30s stood close to the casket. His face expressed genuine grief. Maria guessed that it was Andrew. As they began to disperse, Maria approached him to introduce herself and express her condolences. It was a pity that we had to get acquainted under such sad circumstances. She said, "Your aunt loved you very much." "Thank you, Maria," he said, shaking her hand with a light, musician-like movement. "Aunt Adriana was very comforted that you agreed to take care of her cat. She said she was completely at peace now." "Oh, really?" Maria was embarrassed. "It's not good of the Marquesa." "Will you let me visit her?" asked Andrew. "Yes, of course." Maria explained how to get to her from Adriana's house, where Andrew was to stay for the first time, and they said goodbye. At home, Maria sat for a long time without doing or thinking. The cat was already accustomed to meet her mistress at the door and waited patiently for her to separate. The girl went to the armchair, took Marcus in her arms. He would mumble some quiet words or hum some forgotten songs that suddenly came to mind. Such 5 minutes in the evenings became their custom. Marquise received the warmth of human hands, listened with pleasure to the soft female voice. Maria relaxed, stroking the white smooth, cat-like back, and listened to the purr of a non-animal. "Here we are left with you and me alone, Marquise," Maria told me quietly. "Your mother has left, but don't be sad. She's calmed down now. She's well, she's not in pain. And you and I will remember her with a kind word." A few days after Adriana's funeral, Andrew called. Maria invited him to visit, remembering his request to visit the Marquis. In the evening, she hastily set the tea table. There was no need to clean up for the guests' arrival. In the house at Maria Marquise always reigned perfect order. As if in the absence of the mistress, the cat diligently maintained cleanliness and coziness. Andrew came at the agreed time. He brought Marquise a big bag of cat treats and toys. Maria immediately at the entrance handed a luxurious bouquet of huge lilies, and she immediately put the fragrant flowers on the middle of the table. The cat treated the generous gifts favorably, even regally. With strokes of her paw and with, tried new balls, then settled down in its accustomed place and watched the pair, conversing still at the table with lovely eyes and a satisfied label. Meanwhile, Andrew took out a bottle of Prosecco. "Maria, what about you?" "Oh, you what?" "No, there isn't." "Never had a need." The hostess was confused. She couldn't tell me that all these years she'd lived lonely without merry company. Frankly speaking, my evenings were no different from those of an old woman, a pensioner. Meanwhile, at work she was quite sociable and was quite attractive. "No way," said Andrew. "Decidedly, the straight line will be drawn. Problem solved. The bottle simply must be opened and drunk. I can't afford any weakness today. How can one not drink good wine with such a beauty on their first meeting?" Maria is lively and cheerful. America has introduced more and more new tools. Try a fork. Here's a knife. Oh, wait. I have a screwdriver. And she giggled, dragging the most valuable, in her opinion, tool that could only exist in the house of an old bachelor. Laughing at his own dexterity, Andrew managed to open the bottle by improvised means. Maria brought out the glasses. The first toast was to acquaintance. Both liked the wine. Then they drank, remembering the departed Adriana. Aunt Lena was only 48, a little less than Mom. Andrew said sadly, "She was my mom for the last few years. She called every day, sent me money, even clothes. She and Uncle Id bought them for me without me. Aunt Adriana accurately guessed my size and my tastes, Edward. He was at the funeral. Maria asked. No, I didn't call him. But their mutual coworkers said that he was away with the baby for some kind of baby checkup. You know, Maria, Aunt Adriana didn't say anything about him at the end of his illness. But I think she forgave him. She loved him very much and thought he deserved to be happy with a son, at least in his old age. I guess I'm a maximalist. I can't forgive Uncle Edward. I talk to him whenever I get the chance. I'd even understand to some extent what he did. But you know, Aunt Adriana, she was all straight and honest. No secret criminal anywhere for any money. She should have been happy from start to finish. But it's a cursed disease. I'm sorry we met her so late, Maria replied. I've always dreamed of having a friend. Adriana is older. All the more reason for me to be good to her. Oh, you just didn't see her, young Maria. She was like a light that lit everybody up. She was bright, you know, and she still had a wonderful life. Really, Maria looked up to him. And from what you remember, she gave herself to life to the fullest. That's great. But I always wondered if she was alone. I mean, she had friends, comrades, from way back. She remembered them so warmly. I didn't feel comfortable asking about it. But it was her choice. Maria, Aunt Adriana is a person with a great sense of dignity. Andrew spoke of Lena as if she were alive. When she got sick, she deleted herself from all social media. She stopped even answering her cell phone. She was determined she wasn't going to overshadow other people's lives. Let her friends not see her helplessly weak. And it was only for me that she had to make an exception after chemo. We've always been very close. How could she do without support? It was physically impossible. Andrew confirmed that he would be selling the apartment in 6 months. By law, he was only entitled to it after that period. But today, they felt so good that they didn't want to talk about business or anything sad anymore. Andrew and Marina sat up until almost dawn. It seemed to both of them that they had known each other for a very long time. It was amazing how much they had in common. Movies, favorite songs, poems. They even liked the same writers and poets. Saying goodbye, Andrew suddenly kissed Maria on the cheek. In the afternoon benefits during Maria's lunch break, he called her again. Maria, I was urgently called to work. I'm leaving tonight, and I was so looking forward to meeting you today. What can I do? He said pitifully, so let me come and see you off. Without a second thought, Maria blurted out, and she was very surprised at her own determination. Andrew rejoiced. Really, I wouldn't dream of coming. Come straight from work to my apartment. We'll have dinner together somewhere, and then we'll go to the train station. The evening was very short, but as wonderful as the previous light dinner, farewell at the train station. And now Maria is home. Caring Andrew himself called and paid for a cab, so that the girl would not be alone on the deserted streets at night. A goodbye kiss completely turns Maria's head. Marquesa, what shall I do? Said she to her shaggy-haired friend. I like him so much. How can I live alone now? Marquesa, reproachfully held in her arms, indignant. Do you have me? Oh, you do. Maria's one life was now filled with a great bright feeling. She joyfully got up in the early morning, looked for her cat, ran to work, completely forgetting about her affairs. By the way, she used to exaggerate this flaw of hers. So Maria decided, looking at herself again and again in the big mirror in the hallway. Even though Andrew was not around, she was still expressing and expanding herself every day. She had to look 100% every minute now. And he called more than once a day, and their conversations were full of those hints, those innuendos that truly bring two people together. They had a life together. They're in the cloudy, ephemeral space that gives air to existence. Maria imagined Andrew beside her. Yes, not handsome he is, but so good. With his gorgeous smile, with his quick movements. And most importantly, he treats her so carefully, as if she were made of something beatable. Vasia anticipates her every move. One sunny and June day, the doorbell rang, expecting no one. Maria in a kerchief and an old robe came to open the sudden guest Andrew. Maria was confused and overjoyed. And here I am. She entered the room in which against custom reigned chaos. Maria decided to paste the wallpaper and freshen things up. In the back of her mind, she was waiting for Andrew to arrive. After all, it would soon be 6 months since Adriana's death. He would have to inherit the apartment. Now I'll think of something for breakfast, she hurried after the first greetings. No, Maria, I'm not going to let you do anything on the day I arrive. Get dressed. We're going to a nice place now. They left everything in the same disheveled state and went to a cafe owned by an old acquaintance of Andrew's. Juicy steaks, sparkling wine, fruit. Maria enjoyed everything and marveled at how much pleasantness and pleasure there was in life, and why she thought it wasn't all for her. Andrew opened to her small joys, but also became her great joy. Do you like it? He asked Maria lovingly, looking into her face while chewing grapes. Maria only mooed amusedly, showing that she was at the peak of pleasure. Andrew's visit had a practical purpose. He was going to sort out the paperwork. Maria's help in legal matters was just the right thing for him. In the afternoon, they worked well with the papers, made a plan to sell Adriana's apartment. Honey, you may be wondering why I don't want to move there myself and live next to you, softly asked Andrew, removing from the branches of hair from Maria's neck. The girl was embarrassed. She actually, in the depths of her soul, had been melting the hope that he would do exactly that. And now she suddenly pictured him in the empty corners of the rooms where Adriana had spent so many sorrowful and agonizing months waiting to die. The hopelessness. Everything within those walls had been written by her. Sterile, even the apartment was without life. And despite the light from the large windows, the eerie feeling was so palpable that she didn't notice herself shrieking. No, Andrew, don't live there. He understood her impulse, for that was why he did not think of Adriana's dwelling as his own. No, Maria, we will live quite differently. I'll do everything for you as you want just now. Maria was afraid. But it would be worthwhile for a start for you, he pored over the courtiers' sea in America, laughing at her confusion. To marry me. Maria laughed. He waved his arms. And now he was already twirling her around the room, and she was laughing, hugging him by the neck. Scraps of old wallpaper were flung into the air too. And this strange salute was happening all by itself, in honor of their happy future union. On the window away from this ugliness sat Regal Eye White Cat, and condescendingly Axe began Whiskers. What children these people are. In a few months, the young people bought a wonderful house and moved far away from the noisy city. Every evening, Maria had tea in the gazebo near the house. Andrew turned on the speakers and the couple listened to music. Magnificent Marquise always lay in the arms of the new mistress and peaceful purring.